Chapter 436. Jiang Qiansong thought of many possibilities. The moment Li Tianlan looked down at his watch, he was sure that the other side would have reinforcements. As the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Qiansong did not like trouble or variables. When his side had the absolute advantage, he almost didn't waste any time. From the beginning, his plan was to crush Li Tianlan with the combat capability of two invincible realm experts. The lion hunts the rabbit, the monarch descends upon the world. Jiang Qiansong did not expect that Li Tianlan could still barely withstand the full attack of him and Black Ghost. He also did not expect that Li Tianlan's reinforcements would be Qin Shilai. Why Qin Shilai? How could it be Qin Shilai? The Dark Sword Master was a big shot in Eastern Europe. He was a major character in the entire Qin clan. Since his sword appeared here, there was no doubt that the Qin clan of Eastern Europe had begun to pay attention to this place. The four major families in Eastern Europe, Violet, Morton, Qin clan, and Rekvia. Rekvia was recognized as the weakest of the four major families. As for which of the four great clans was the strongest, different people had different opinions. In the hearts of Eastern Europeans, the Violet family was naturally the leader of the four major families. This top wealthy family rooted in Snow Country could almost be said to have taken the entire Snow Country as its own foundation. In particular, in the past 100 years, the president and prime minister of Snow Country had strong violet colors. All the oligarchs in Snow Country had to bow their heads in the shadow of the Violet family. With such influence, it was naturally the strongest. It was the world's top military, financial, media, and energy giant. In the hearts of all Europeans, the strength of the Morton family was not necessarily worse than that of the Violet family. It was indeed difficult for the Morton family to compare with the Violet family in Snow Country, but its influence in Eastern Europe was unparalleled. The patriarch of the Morton family was even the only strong man in the world who could talk and laugh in front of the patriarchs of the Eastern Church and the Vatican. Moreover, when the Polar Ground Alliance existed, the tyrant was notoriously willing to listen to the command of the Morton family. The Morton family in Eastern Europe was the first wealthy family to propose the establishment of the Polar Ground Alliance. In the eyes of the people of the Dark World, the Qin clan was truly unfathomable. Because the people in the Dark World could see things that many people couldn't see or deliberately ignored. That was the skin color of the Qin clan. The Qin clan were all Chinese. A Chinese family was able to develop into one of the four major families in Eastern Europe, which was extremely xenophobic and valiant. This in itself showed their unfathomable heritage. The level of a wealthy family was different from that of a martial artist. There were no clear levels. But in the hearts of the people in the Dark World, the Wang family of Beihai and the Jiang family of South America were the top superpowers. Among the four major families in Eastern Europe, the Qin clan had been infinitely close to this level at its peak many years ago. Later, although its strength had shrunk, the current Qin clan was still only one step away from the level of the Wang family of Beihai and the Jiang family of South America. Therefore, in the Dark World, the mysterious Violet, the powerful Morton, and the powerful Rekvia were not as deterrent as the low-key and silent Qin clan. The Qin clan was special in Eastern Europe. And Qin Shilai was also special in the Dark World. For hundreds of years, the martial arts in the Dark World had been dominated by the sword. Swordsmanship was extremely prosperous, and there were countless masters. In the past 2 decades, Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhongzhou State could be said to be at the peak of swordsmanship and martial arts in this era. But Qin Shilai was known as the Dark Sword Master, Sword Emperor and Sword Saint. In comparison, this form of address was a complete insult. But Qin Shilai, who had just entered the invincible realm, accepted it calmly. Then he took the famous sword, Sharpness, of the Qin clan and went directly to Mount Dibing to challenge Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong. Although Qin Shilai was defeated, he escaped unscathed. So that year, Qin Shilai, who had just entered the invincible realm, directly rushed into the top 10 of the holy list. 8 years ago, Qin Shilai, the Dark Sword Master, went to Mount Dibing again. Sharpness versus Listen to the Sea. The Sword Emperor won. Qin Shilai still escaped unscathed. 3 years ago, the sword sage went to Mount Dibbing for 3 times. He was defeated again. But he escaped unscathed again. Qin Shilai was now the first on the holy list. And Wang Tianzong was the first on the divine list many years ago. The gap between the two was like a chasm. No one thought that Qin Shilai had the strength to escape unscathed in front of Wang Tianzong. Even if Qin Shilai was at his peak, he might not be able to make Wang Tianzong draw his sword. Wang Tianzong was willing to draw his sword and fight with him, which could only show that the Qin clan and the Wang family of Beihai had a relationship. The Jiang family of South America had been cooperating with the Rekvia family in recent years. Therefore, Jiang Qiansong once paid close attention to this issue. But the Jiang family of South America investigated a lot of things, but found nothing. In the end, all clues pointed to the Wang family of Beihai, the Lin clan, and the Qin clan. The Qin clan seemed to have some relationship with the Wang family and the Lin clan. As a result, in some games between the Lin clan and the Wang family, in order not to hurt the harmony, they usually regarded the Qin clan as an extremely advantageous bargaining chip. The relationship between the Lin clan and the Qin clan seemed to be a little subtle. They were not enemies, but they had not been friendly for many years. On the contrary, the Qin clan and the Wang family of Beihai were more harmonious. The Jiang family of South America had always thought that the Qin clan would be the most powerful partner of the Wang family of Beihai in Eastern Europe. But why was Qin Shilai on Li Tianlan's side now? Or was the Qin clan on Zhongzhou State's side? Jiang Qiansong suddenly felt something in his heart and looked around subconsciously. It was quiet around the dilapidated castle. The faint sword intent was still surging. The fire was still burning. But in silence, one figure after another had appeared in the silent night. 5 people in a group. The various teams silently appeared near the castle, motionless in the night. They were so quiet that Jiang Qiansong, who focused on Qin Shilai, completely ignored their existence. The quieter they were, the more powerful they were. Jiang Qiansong's heart suddenly became a little cold. Qin Shilai was already standing beside Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's face was pale, but his eyes were still sharp, and his spirit seemed to be still at its peak. He looked into Qin Shilai's eyes and said slowly, "You're a minute late. I was in a hurry on the way. And I'm not familiar with them. There's an error in time." Qin Shilai pointed to the figure in the dark. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. He turned his eyes to Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost. In his heart, he still replayed the joint attack of Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost. It was so perfect and so powerful. The ubiquitous power pushed him to the edge of death. In that kind of suffocating pressure, Li Tianlan felt only humiliation and fear. The fear of death. His heart was beating wildly, and the muscles of his body tightened a little to suppress the wound. "What do you say now?" Li Tianlan asked. "I can't stand Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost. They can't stand it either." Qin Shilai's tone was calm. "You don't have to." There was a trace of red light in Li Tianlan's eyes, which looked extremely strange. He pointed to Black Ghost and said, "Leave him to me." As he spoke, his body straightened up little by little. A kind of madness that almost tore everything came out of his eyes. The blood flowed along his body, with sword intent and unparalleled sharpness. Qin Shilai frowned. Before he could speak, Jiang Qiansong had suddenly turned back. "Who are they?" He pointed to groups of figures in the dark night that were as silent as statues and asked in a low voice. He knew the super force of the Qin clan. But there was no sign of the Qin clan's super force being mobilized at present, and the Qin clan's troops could not have such a terrifying and silent aura. These people who appeared near the castle in the night were no less than the heaven punishment troop of the Wang family of Beihai in terms of momentum and aura. The Qin clan could not afford such a troop at present. They? Qin Shilai glanced at them, and his eyes were also a little dazed. In his memory, this seemed to be the first time in nearly 100 years that the Qin clan had mobilized this troop. This meant that many things would change greatly from tonight onwards. "Let me introduce them." Qin Shilai's tone was indifferent, and he said unhurriedly, "The Qin clan, Xianyuan sword." Qin clan? Xianyuan sword? Jiang Qinsong's mind suddenly seemed to realize something, but he couldn't accurately grasp it. His mind was immediately occupied by the Xianyuan sword. The Xianyuan sword. The Lin clan's super troop. This was an absolute elite force that could compete with the heaven punishment troop of the Wang family of Beihai. For them to appear here, could it be, the Lin clan had entered the secular world? However, why did the Xianyuan sword become the Qin clan's Xianyuan sword? Jiang Qinsong opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. You want to know why we didn't choose the Wang family of Beihai, but chose the Samsara Palace and His Highness Li Tianlan? Qin Shilai laughed. Li Tianlan seemed to be very concerned about this issue, and his ears moved slightly. The relationship between the Qin clan in Eastern Europe and the Wang family of Beihai was not a secret. Qin Shilai came to Dibbing Mountain 3 times and retreated 3 times, which was enough to explain a lot of problems. This time, he chose to cooperate with the Samsara Palace instead of the Wang family of Beihai. Li Tianlan still didn't know why. Because of a note. It seemed to be an explanation to Jiang Qinsong, but in fact, it was an explanation to Li Tianlan. Qin Shilai took out a note from his arms and handed it to Li Tianlan. The note was folded very carefully. It was very small. The handwriting on it was also very simple. There was only one sentence. "We're all a family. Come back." It was a simple word. But the handwriting was not simple. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. This was Lin Fengting's handwriting. They were all a family? They were all a family? Your Highness, don't you understand? Qin Shilai whispered, "Think about the development model of the Lin clan. Time has annihilated many facts. For example, the guy in front of me asked the Jiang family of South America to check a lot of information about the Qin clan, the Lin clan, and the Wang family of Beihai, but they found nothing. Because some things are really too long ago, so long ago that all the clues have disappeared. But the truth is the truth." Qin Shilai said calmly, "The Qin clan was a branch of the Lin clan many years ago. And it was the first branch of the Lin clan. Happy New Year, everyone, I'm back." Chapter 437. As the heir of the Li family, who was inextricably linked to the Lin clan, it was impossible for Li Tianlan not to know the history of the Lin clan. But if he traced back to the source, it had been too long. Without reading the extremely secretive genealogy kept by the Lin clan, it was also impossible for him to know what branches the Lin clan had. The Qin clan in Eastern Europe. This super wealthy family, which was not far from the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan in terms of scale and strength, was it a branch of the Lin clan? And it was the first branch. This meant that they were the first people to come out of the Lin clan in Switzerland after the establishment of the Lin clan. It also meant, this was the direct descendant of the founder of Zhuanyuantai. If this was true, then no matter what the surname of the Qin clan was, it was indeed a family with the Lin clan. The Lin clan. The Qin clan. Li Tianlan's heart was in turmoil. The Lin clan had been in seclusion for a long time. This time, it extended its hand to Eastern Europe with the help of the Qin clan. How big a wave would this behemoth that had lived in seclusion in Switzerland for hundreds of years cause? It's impossible. Jiang Qinsong seemed to be the most affected. His face was completely distorted in an instant, becoming extremely terrifying, with a touch of unwillingness to fail at the verge of success. This was an extremely wonderful and complicated expression with rich meanings. You, Jiang Qinsong pointed at Qin Shilai and Li Tianlan. His face turned livid, then purple-red, and finally black-red. His fingers pointed forward with great force. In an exasperated tone, as his fingers moved forward, what was driven was the dark knife light that was condensed and calm to the extreme. Black Ghost stood beside Jiang Qinsong and was completely silent. The power that was infinitely close to perfection surged in front of Jiang Qinsong, impacting everything. 30-meter mortal world stealing the sky for changing the sun. The move that almost forced Li Tianlan into a desperate situation just now was called crossing the sea by deception. It was Jiang Qiansong who lent his strength to Black Ghost. Now, in this move, Jiang Qiansong borrowed the power of Black Ghost in an instant. The ultimate defense and the ultimate attack were infinitely close to a perfect integration. Jiang Qiansong had no knife in his hand. But as his fingers pointed out, the void collapsed in an instant, and the earth was torn apart inch by inch. The ferocious gully in the earth continued to spread and twist on the surface. The destructive power once again formed a black tide shining with a dark luster. The black tide overturned everything. In Jiang Qiansong's sight, he and Black Ghost once again joined forces to attack with all their might, directly covering every inch of space around Li Tianlan and Qin Shilai. Power vibrated everywhere, destroying all matter. Qin Shilai wanted to buy time. Li Tianlan wanted to buy time. In such a situation, the longer they delayed, the more advantageous it would be for them. But Jiang Qiansong didn't want to waste time. Therefore, he used the most realistic expression to express his anger, and at the same time, forcefully borrowed strength. This was a sneak attack. Without any warning, the killing intent covered the sky and covered the earth in an instant. Li Tianlan did not move. Qin Shilai did not move. Even the troops of Shenyuan's sword standing quietly near the castle did not move. The monstrous power swept over Li Tianlan and Qin Shilai. This was an almost unstoppable attack. Blood spurted out from their bodies. The famed sword shattered inch by inch. Qin Shilai's body was completely distorted by the power and exploded into a bloody mist all over the sky. Falling star fell to the ground. Li Tianlan's body shattered bit by bit with blood. The monstrous power obliterated the geniuses, obliterated the sword saints, and slowly dissipated. The expression on Jiang Qiansong's face relaxed a little. The black tide completely passed. The night sky became silent again. Then, in the other direction, Jiang Qiansong drove to Qin Shilai and Li Tianlan. Qin Shilai stood there, still unrestrained and wild. Li Tianlan's eyes became more and more scarlet, looking extremely strange. When the black tide swept in front of the two of them, they did not dodge at all, but seemed to have never moved at all. Jiang Qiansong's brain went blank for a moment. He didn't know what was going on. Qin Shilai looked at Jiang Qiansong quietly, as if he were looking at an idiot. Everyone in the castle was also looking at Jiang Qiansong. They also looked at him as if they were looking at an idiot. In everyone's sight, Jiang Qiansong just reached out and pointed to the space in front of him, and then there was an earth-shattering blow. But the direction covered by that blow was at least 50 meters away from Qin Shilai and Li Tianlan. That was an indescribable picture. In such a serious and cruel battlefield, as this blow fell, it became a little embarrassing. Jiang Qiansong's hand still kept pointing forward. He raised his arm and didn't say anything for a while. Qin Shilai tilted his head, thought for a moment, and then said slowly, "Oh, did you miss the target just now?" He held the edge in his hand. "Do you want to sneak an attack? Your aim is too bad. Are your eyes not working well because you're old?" A mouthful of blood flowed down Jiang Qiansong's chest into his throat, and he swallowed it. His face really turned livid, and his mood became extremely irritable. Looking at Qin Shilai, he gritted his teeth and said, "Hypnosis?" This was the most likely possibility. Although this speculation was also incredible. Hypnosis? Qin Shilai twitched the corner of his mouth. In the silent night, Jiang Qiansong clearly saw a trace of frivolity in the curve of his mouth. Ancestor Linglong. The Dark Sword Master, who was famous in Eastern Europe, said lightly. There was a touch of doubt in Jiang Qiansong's eyes. It had been too long. He didn't know who Linglong was at all. But Li Tianlan understood in an instant. The founder of the Lin clan, who created Zhuanyuantai, was named Shenyuan. As for his wife, she was Linglong hundreds of years ago. She was the first person from Zhongzhou state who could rival the Western Pope in the spiritual domain. The spiritual domain was broad and profound. The so-called hypnosis could only be said to be a part of the spiritual domain. There was no realm in this domain, or there was only one realm. The transcendent realm. Now, in the world, only the Pope could reach this realm in the spiritual domain. Qin Shilai had not reached the transcendent realm in the spiritual domain, but he used a little trick to deceive Jiang Qinsong's perception in an instant. It was not easy, but it was not as difficult as climbing to the sky. Jiang Qinsong took a step back calmly. Crossing the sea by deception and stealing the sky for another day were both the essence of the 30-meter mortal world. Whether it was borrowing power or being borrowed power, it could be said to be exquisite and unparalleled. But such a unique skill also needed to pay a big price. He and Black Ghost tried their best twice. To reach the realm that was infinitely close to perfection, they needed to pay more physical strength than in the normal state. The first blow did not kill Li Tianlan. The second blow became an extremely embarrassing joke. Now he and Black Ghost were no longer in their peak state. What they needed to face now was the Dark Sword Master Qin Shilai in his heyday, Li Tianlan in a seriously injured state, and at least 100 super elites of Shenyuan Sword and Rekvia Castle. There was still a chance of winning. But the risk had vaguely exceeded the bottom line that Jiang Qinsong could bear. He was famous for his defense. What he hated most was radical, and what he liked most was stability. But the current situation was not right. Should he advance or retreat? Li Tianlan and Qin Shilai did not give Jiang Qinsong a chance to hesitate. Li Tianlan took the initiative to break the delicate silence. He glanced at Qin Shilai and said calmly, "Can you?" Qin Shilai was stunned for a moment. In his sight, Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood, was particularly red. "It's no problem to pester Jiang Qinsong," he said slowly, "but can you do it?" Li Tianlan did not speak. He was not a talkative person. On the battlefield, he did not like nonsense. His muscles were completely tightened, and his body was still bleeding, but the speed of bleeding was much slower. He stepped out and went directly to Black Ghost. Black Ghost narrowed his eyes. He opened his mouth and felt that he should say something. "You," as soon as he said the first word. But Li Tianlan, who had no intention of delaying time, did not say a word. He did not even slow down. The first step fell. Then the second step. Boom! The ground of the entire castle shook with a loud rumble. The echo of Black Ghost was still spreading. But there was no shadow of Li Tianlan and Black Ghost in everyone's sight. The wind all over the skies suddenly whistled. It was as cold as a knife. Black Ghost's body tightened in an instant. In his sight, there was only a pair of scarlet and crazy eyes. It was a pair of eyes without any sense or extra emotion. The strange red light was flickering slightly. The attacks like a storm broke out in an instant. There was only violence. There was only madness. This was also a unique skill. But it was a unique skill that Black Ghost was not familiar with. This unique skill came from the weakest martial arts force in Jianghu state in recent decades. Azura Path. Li Tianlan had not had much contact with Azura Path. But he had contacted Hua Qingfeng, the Shadow Sect master who split from Azura Path. For decades, the reason why Azura Path was so hostile to the Shadow Sect was that, in addition to Hua Qingfeng's departure from Azura Path, the most important reason was that Hua Qingfeng also took away the most quintessential unique skill of Azura Path. Insane Devil. Chapter 438. The Wang family of Beihai could stand at the peak of martial arts for hundreds of years because they had the 6 paths of reincarnation, which was known as the ultimate outbreak of the world. In the days when the Li family had not fallen from the altar, it was also recognized by the world as the best in Kendo because the last 3 ultimate swords of the 24 moves of sword was unparalleled. Azura Path had been glorious. In terms of time, Azura Path existed in Jianghu state even before Mount Shu. At the peak of Azura Path, their master had also been at the top of the divine list and stood beside several experts at the peak of the invincible realm without being at a disadvantage. That was a long, long time ago. That amazing figure had completely perfected the martial arts of Azura Path and pushed Azura Path to the peak of the dark world when he was alive. Every martial arts force, more or less, sooner or later, must have its own essence as long as it could be inherited. The essence of Azura Path was only one move. Daoist madness. Now the essence of this move was not in the hands of Azura Path. It was in the hands of Hua Qingfeng, the master of the Shadow Sect. Now it was in the hands of Li Tianlan. To some extent, Daoist madness was worthy of its name. This unique skill was completely strange and domineering. The extremely strange way of exerting force and the absolutely violent way of accumulating force finally resulted in the madness and domineeringness of losing all reason. Martial arts madness exerted force at the end of the spine. This move had existed for hundreds of years, and there was still no unique skill in the dark world that first exerted force here. Exerting force from the end of the spine and connecting the upper and lower limbs, the violent accumulation of force at that moment not only brought absolute power, but also pain that was enough to drown all reason. This way of exerting force brought almost permanent damage to the spine. Not only did it burn one's potential, but it was also cruelly destroying one's own body. Before hurting the enemy, he hurt himself first. The craziest and most tragic unique skill. But it was enough to make Li Tianlan completely burst out incredible combat capability in an instant. Dual wind and thunder veins were almost half destroyed in today's battle. But even if they were really half destroyed, Li Tianlan still had wind and thunder veins. The moment his spine tightened, his limbs were directly stretched to the limit in the process of blood burning wildly. Li Tianlan's eyes had no luster except for the scarlet killing intent. The boundless pain almost ignored all of his willpower and completely drowned his reason in an instant. The world seemed to have disappeared. All the sounds were getting further and further away. There were only flowing sounds in Li Tianlan's ears. It was neither gentle nor slow, but extremely violent, like boiling magma surging violently. It was the sound of his blood burning. At this moment, Li Tianlan had lost his mind. However, his body was exceptionally awake. Black Ghost was particularly clear in his eyes, and vaguely seemed to have become his only goal. All of his judgments were unprecedentedly swift and clear. This is not the judgment of the brain. It was instinct. It was the most terrifying, most natural, and most ferocious instinct. This kind of reaction speed had almost surpassed everything else. And all the attacks, dodging, advancing, and retreating made by such extreme reaction speed had another famous name in the dark world. Night walking. It was the strongest body movement recorded in the invincible manual of the catalogue of God of War of the Li family and the Lin clan. Li Tianlan gave up reason and relied on instinct. In a battle where he didn't need to consider other factors, this was almost his most perfect state at present. His taut bones continued to crackle, sounding like a dragon's roar. Martial Dao Berserk, Night Walking, Dragon Fist. Close combat, burning his potential in exchange for great combat power, the fastest reaction speed, the most ferocious attacks. In this state, Li Tianlan was completely fearless. Attack. 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 Every cell in his body seemed to be roaring to support his craziest fight. Black Ghost kept retreating in his sight. The dark knife light merged with the night. The sound of the wind became violent in an instant. The figures of Li Tianlan and Black Ghost drew closer again at the moment when they were pulled apart. The knife light slashed on Li Tianlan. The broken clothes of Cloud Silk became more and more damaged. The moment the blood splashed, Li Tianlan, who had entered the best attack distance, became completely violent. Fire appeared in Black Ghost's pupils. There was thunder. The orange and blue colors flickered for a moment. The next second, the flames and thunder all turned into a strange pale white. The turbulent energy did not spread, but condensed to the limit, turning into extremely pale and demonic white spots. The white spots seemed to be suddenly pressed down before they were completely formed. Violent wind and rainstorm. In an instant, Black Ghost's eyes were full of attacks. In the dragon's roar, which was not grand but almost deafening, Li Tianlan's body had completely become a phantom that could not be captured by the naked eye. His body was there. But he was moving. Straight punch, uppercut, elbow strike, knee hit, leg sweep, roundhouse. Fast. In addition to the speed, Black Ghost only felt the extreme power. Retreat. Black Ghost could only retreat. His defense was extremely poor. Under such power, he could hardly bear any of Li Tianlan's attacks. And Li Tianlan in this state, Black Ghost believed that he could not bear any of his attacks either. But the problem was that Black Ghost had no chance to attack at all. Li Tianlan gave up all his defenses in exchange for the most violent attack. In this state, Li Tianlan also had no defense. Both of them had no defense. One of them attacked wildly. One of them dodged. This was a real life and death fight. Both of them were looking for opportunities. The moment the stalemate was broken, it must be a clear life and death. Jiang Qinsong stared at the battle between Li Tianlan and Black Ghost. His heart kept sinking. He had never thought that Li Tianlan, who was seriously injured to this extent, could still have enough combat power to suppress Black Ghost in an instant. Li Tianlan was not Black Ghost's opponent. The current suppression could only be described as a stalemate. But no matter how strong Black Ghost was on paper, in a real battle, his lack of defense would become a great variable. What Jiang Qinsong hated most was variables. The Jiang family of South America lost Wuxia Xianxia 3 years ago. Today, they lost Jiang Qinyan again. In any case, Black Ghost must be alive. Otherwise, how could the Jiang family of South America, supported by him alone, expand in the future? And the death of Black Ghost meant that the layout of the Jiang family of South America and Eastern Europe had completely failed. All the current situations would be completely changed. Such a change, in addition to making Li Tianlan rise completely in the dark world, was also an absolute disaster for the Jiang family of South America. Jiang Qinsong took a step back subconsciously. In the current situation, he no longer thought about how to win, but had begun to think about how to retreat with Black Ghost. His footsteps just moved. An indescribable sense of oppression had come from all directions. Black Ghost completely disappeared in front of him. There was only light in Jiang Qinsong's world. The light was continuous and filled the surroundings, like a wildfire burning the sky, like a thunder that could destroy the world. The 100 elites of Xianyuan sword troop were still silent. But at the same time, they attacked with all their strength. 100 experts with average strength at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. Such a team meant that there were at least 30 thunder-shocking realm experts. 30. Only real behemoths like the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan could have such a scale of power. Qin Shilai's figure also disappeared in the dazzling light. But the sword light of Sharp Edge, which was famous in Eastern Europe, was surging. The dark sword master hid in the darkness again outside the light. His voice sounded in Jiang Qinsong's ear with killing intent. It was extremely clear. You will die today. Chapter 439. Everyone understood. From the moment Jiang Qinsong, the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, and Black Ghost stood in the castle of Rekvia, the castle, known as the strongest war fortress in Eastern Europe, had been doomed. So Rekvia had already reached a consensus at the beginning of the battle. The castle was the foundation of Rekvia. But for the survival of the family, it was time to abandon the castle now. Tostel, who temporarily controlled Rekvia as a usurper, handed over the control of the castle and all system passwords to Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud of Sai City at the beginning of the war. This was a deal. Tostel handed over the complete control of the castle in exchange for the patriarch of Rekvia, his biological brother Schenker. In such a situation, such a deal, neither side felt that it was a loss. All the experts of the Rekvia family assisted Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud to start the weapon. But Tostel had already begun to transfer the important members of the Rekvia family at the beginning of the battle. 500 meters below the castle, there was an extremely well-hidden refuge. There was a secret passage in the refuge. Through the passage that cost a lot of money, a small number of important members of Rekvia could directly reach a small town less than 6 kilometers away from the castle. There were helicopters with special permissions in Wulan State parked in the small town. Taking the helicopter, they could reach all corners of Reki City in less than 20 minutes. This passage was very suitable for retreat. But in a way, it was also very suitable for invasion. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud stayed in the control room of the castle. Cool Breeze stared at the battle in the castle, while Drifting Cloud stared at Tostel, who was retreating from the passage. The control room of the castle was very large. It looked extremely solemn on weekdays. But the battle between the experts of the Invincible Realm not only destroyed the front part of the huge castle, but also the main structure of the entire castle had been seriously damaged. At this moment, the shrill alarm kept echoing in the control room. The big screen in the center reflected the battle in front of the castle, but more screens had been garbled, which meant that there were signals of failure or even complete damage in different areas of the castle. At present, the castle is seriously damaged. Cool Breeze said in a calm tone, the 3rd and 4th defense facilities have been completely destroyed, and the 5th defense is out of order. It will take at least 8 hours to repair, and this battle. He paused for a moment. In other words, in this battle, this seemingly intimidating castle can't be counted on? Drifting Cloud shook his head. The strongest fortress in Eastern Europe, an ancient castle that can deter Invincible Realm experts, is this what it looks like? Not everyone is Jiang Qiansong. Cool Breeze smiled bitterly. If it were an Invincible Realm expert tonight, even if the governor came in person, the laser and the destroyer in front would be enough to seriously injure the governor. Once this so-called fortress encountered a tortoise shell like Jiang Qiansong's, its role would indeed be reduced a lot. And tonight, before Qin Shilai came here, there were 3 Invincible Realm experts fighting. In such a battle, what can an ancient castle do? He took out a cigarette, lit it, and suddenly said, "And what can we do here?" Lu Yun fell silent. They were top assassins in Zhongzhou State and even in the Dark World. Assassins didn't need to defend themselves. There was no clear division of professions in the Dark World, but different paths had different directions. An assassin was like a knife in the dark, killing without leaving a trace and killing with a single strike. However, in a battlefield where one had to face the enemy head-on, the role of an assassin was infinitely close to zero. Because they had no defense. Not to mention intervening in the battle of the Invincible Realm. Even on the battlefield where tens of thousands of elites fought, the living space of 1 or 2 assassins at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm would be greatly compressed. The current situation was already very clear. The ancient castle of Rekvia couldn't do anything. It was also useless for Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud to stay here. In a head-on confrontation, they couldn't even stop the moves of several Invincible Realm experts. Even if they found the best opportunity, they needed to fight for that possibility at the cost of their lives. Cool Breeze took a big drag on his cigarette and suddenly said, "It's almost time." The 2 of them knew very well that it was of little use to stay here. Li Tianlan naturally knew it. According to the plan, after the castle couldn't play a role, the 2 of them should follow the important members of Rekvia to Reki City as soon as possible. But the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. The planned castle couldn't play a role after all the energy was exhausted and all the weapons couldn't be used. Instead of being completely destroyed by the battle of several people. "It's time to go," Drifting Cloud said blandly. Cool Breeze raised his eyebrows. "Go?" He glanced at the screen in the center of the control room. The screen was full of light. Hundreds of super elites of Xianyuan sword were advancing layer by layer. The sharp sword energy soared into the sky and tore the sky. On the battlefield between Li Tianlan and Black Ghost, the space was constantly twisting and exploding. Nothing could be seen. The situation was unclear. Were they leaving? "This is His Highness's order." Drifting Cloud looked down at the positioning device on his wrist. That was the tracker he left on Tostel. They have arrived at the refuge, about 4 kilometers from the exit of the passage. Drifting Cloud's tone became calmer. "There's nothing for us to do here. We must enter Reki City at this time and prepare for His Highness's follow-up arrangements. Cool Breeze glanced at him and nodded. Let's go. Drifting Cloud chuckled and finally glanced at the screen where the battle was extremely fierce. 26 people. I guess we have to act separately. Almost at the same time. A private helicopter entering from Snow Country slowly approached the sky over Reki City. Reki City, which was already in a state of martial law, reacted very quickly. As soon as the signal of the private helicopter was captured, the armed helicopter of Reki City's military had already rushed over fiercely. This is the airspace of Wulan State. You have entered the airspace under martial law. Please show me your identity. Repeat, this is. The majestic voice came out through the loudspeaker on the armed helicopter. However, before the military of Wulan State repeated it for the second time, a female voice had already sounded on the private helicopter without any weapons. It was a very authentic English pronunciation. The voice was very pleasant to hear, but it was extremely cold and indifferent. I'm King Tong. King Tong Irene Wang Rothschild. I'm entering Reki City now. Get out of the way. Clear, brief, straightforward, and domineering. King Tong. The Grand Duke of England. But everyone knew her other identity. The Queen of the Shadow Throne, who ranked 11th on the World Divine List. The military helicopter of Wulan State suddenly fell silent. The silence lasted no more than a minute. There seemed to be an urgent report on the helicopter. Then several helicopters turned in silence and flew to Reki City. The helicopter of the Queen of Shadows also flew to Reki City. The Queen sat in the cabin and looked at the armed helicopter that was getting farther and farther away. Her smile was a little cold. There was no doubt that the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance had made Rekvia, one of the 4 major families in Eastern Europe, completely out of control. Rekvia's loss of control also meant that Wulan State was out of control. In the surging general trend, the Jianghu family of South America, Zhongzhou State, and Rothschild were already involved. The only thing Wulan State could do at this time was to wait and see and wait for the final winner. The chaos in Eastern Europe stemmed from the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance. In the final analysis, it actually stemmed from the interest entanglement between the 4 major families. As one of the 4 major families, the Rekvia family lacked an invincible realm expert, so it naturally became the most important breakthrough point in the chaos in Eastern Europe. In the chaos in Eastern Europe, whoever could occupy Rekvia and Reki City would basically prove who would be invincible in Eastern Europe. King Tong stood up straight. The wind and rain over Reki City had stopped. The night was hazy and silent. It was an ordinary day. It was a turbulent day. From the perspective of later generations, this day was enough to be recorded in the history of all of Eastern Europe. Because in this chaos that was enough to affect the general trend in Eastern Europe for hundreds of years, this day was unanimously regarded as the beginning of the whole chaos by later generations. In the chaos, before the arrival of the trial day. This day was called the Day of Death. Chapter 440. Killing intent was everywhere. There were battles everywhere. The entire Rekvia castle was constantly shaking in the fierce battle. Light and darkness. Domain and sword light. Thunder and raging fire. Fighting and blood. And order and chaos. Dark Sword Master Qin Shilai was indeed no match for Jiang Qiansong in terms of hard strength. The first on the holy list could barely break Jiang Qiansong's defense. However, hundreds of super elites of Xianyuan sword supported him from all directions. The infinite thunderbolts and sword intent formed one complicated and changeable sword formation after another. Qin Shilai naturally became the center of the sword formation. He restrained most of Jiang Qiansong's attacks with his own strength. The attacks of hundreds of super elites roared in the night sky. This process was doomed to be dangerous, but it was the most formal way of fighting. It was formal and effective. The dense offensive like the waves and the sea held Jiang Qiansong in place. Jiang Qiansong still maintained his defensive domain. His face was a little pale. He was dealing with the attacks of Qin Shilai and hundreds of elites of Shenyuan's sword with all his strength. He had no time to take care of Black Ghost. Black Ghost also did not have the mind to think about Jiang Qinsong's situation. Jiang Qinsong was fighting in a very formal way. But he was in complete chaos. Africa was chaotic. Black Ghost, who came out of the death training camp in Africa, could be said to be the king of chaos. But Black Ghost had never experienced such a battle. Madness, precision, swiftness, keenness, hysteria, desperation. In the case of one-on-one, Li Tianlan's sudden outbreak was completely with a spirit that completely ignored life and death. Attack, attack, attack. The illusory space continued to shatter and explode as Li Tianlan moved forward. Black Ghost tried his best to dodge and looked for opportunities to fight back. But all the counterattacks were suppressed. Li Tianlan, whose essence, qi, and spirit were fully condensed, instinctively reacted faster than Black Ghost. Black Ghost's counterattack was getting less and less. Many times, when his arm just moved, before he had time to lift it, the roaring dragon fist with sword intent had completely blocked all his possible attack routes. As soon as his knife light was raised, Li Tianlan had already appeared one step ahead of him in the most inconvenient place for him to attack. In this state, Li Tianlan had completely become the most difficult opponent Black Ghost had encountered since his debut. He could see the limits of Li Tianlan's strength. After all, the combat power of the invincible realm was not the real invincible realm. The strength of Black Ghost was definitely above Li Tianlan. But the problem was that defense was his greatest weakness. If his defense was also at the level of the invincible realm, he could take 2 attacks from Li Tianlan at the risk of being seriously injured, and then kill Li Tianlan in this state in an instant. But with his current defense, Li Tianlan's first strike would probably make him lose most of his combat power. In the case of insufficient defense and completely suppressed reaction speed, Black Ghost's attack power was enough to be on the divine list, but he couldn't play any of it in Li Tianlan's crazy attack. This had nothing to do with the level of one's cultivation. In this state, Li Tianlan's fighting style completely suppressed the special invincible realm expert like Black Ghost, who had no power to fight back. Black Ghost kept retreating. Li Tianlan had gone completely mad. The two of them entangled and left the battlefield of Qin Shilai and Jiang Qinsong in the shortest time. Between the chase and the escape, Li Tianlan completely crushed Black Ghost and rushed into the cracked castle. The chaotic battle in the castle seemed to pause for a moment. Then there was a loud bang. A large area of the entire castle collapsed, and stones fell. In the smoke and dust all over the sky, the remaining castle kept shaking. The crazy fighting did not stop, and it continued to spread in the castle, farther and farther, as if to penetrate the entire castle. Jiang Qinsong's heart became more and more impatient. At this point, he thought he had seen the situation clearly. Although he didn't want to admit it. But for the Jiang family of South America, tonight was a failure. At least with Shenyuan's sword and Qin Shilai here, the possibility of him killing Li Tianlan was almost non-existent. It was also impossible for him to take down Rekvia tonight. In his perception, Black Ghost was getting farther and farther away from himself. The uneasiness in Jiang Qinsong's heart surged and grew stronger. His body suddenly retreated dozens of meters and took out a whistle from his pocket. Jiang Qinsong put the whistle to his mouth and blew hard. The extremely sharp whistle echoed between the mountains of the castle in an instant, bringing about layers of echoes. This was the whistle to summon Black Ghost. In other words, this was a signal to retreat. Although unwilling, at the critical moment, when the balance of life and death gradually tilted, Jiang Qinsong could only admit his failure. After tonight, the situation of the Jiang family of South America was destined to be precarious. But it was not completely hopeless. What even Rekvia didn't know was that the Jiang family of South America had an extremely hidden base 100 kilometers away from Reki City. The elites of the Jiang family of South America were also hidden there. As long as Jiang Qinsong and Black Ghost arrived there, even if they failed tonight, the Jiang family of South America could still save a chance to turn the tables. Jiang Qinsong blew the whistle, and the whistle became more and more shrill. In his mind, he had begun to plan how to use the hidden base to make a comeback. The base was less than 100 kilometers away from Reki City. At this distance, there were too many things to do. Jiang Qinsong will come here. When Reki City and even the entire Wulan state were under martial law, Qin Weibai, who should not have appeared here, was standing on a low hillside in a mountainous area nearly 100 kilometers away from Reki City, quietly looking at the rolling mountains in front of her. If he fails, this is his only choice. What if he wins? Lin Fengting suddenly asked. Qin Weibai glanced at him. It was possible before. She said slowly, but now Tianlan and Qin Shilai have met. What chance does Jiang Qinsong have? Lin Fengting smiled and did not ask the question in detail. He just looked at the mountainous area in his sight and asked, which mountain? Every mountain is the same. The entrance is on this mountain. It can be said that this is the largest and most secret base of the Jiang family of South America in Eastern Europe. However, the interior of the mountain has been reinforced by a special alloy that is hundreds of meters thick. If you want to enter the base, you need to go through 13 security checks. The mountains are connected but not connected. If you want to walk through the whole base, without special permission, almost no one can do it by relying on brute force. Qin Weibai pointed at one of the lowest peaks. You seem to know this place very well. Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai and said meaningfully. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and whispered, I've been here once, just once. She seemed to want to say something, but finally shook her head. So, you have permission here? Lin Fengting asked. I don't. Qin Weibai shook her head. Lin Fengting frowned and thought, this place is so abnormal. You don't have permission. Do you really want me to go in with brute force? That was what he thought, so he asked directly. We don't need to go in. Qin Weibai explained calmly, I'm standing about 300 meters away from the base's cordon. This is the only way to enter the base. We just need to wait for Jiang Qinsong here. Lin Fengting still wanted to speak, but the phone suddenly rang. He took out his mobile phone and answered it. After saying a few words, he put down the phone. Qin Weibai glanced at him. According to reliable information, King Tong entered Reki City 20 minutes ago. The Vatican and Knights Templars entered Reki City 15 minutes ago. Qin Weibai's eyes flickered, but she did not speak. Lin Fengting said the most important piece of information, Tianzong has arrived in Eastern Europe, less than 20 miles away from Reki City. Qin Weibai's body suddenly tightened, and she subconsciously clenched her fists. Lin Fengting looked at her for a while and said slowly, it's not too late to get there now. Qin Weibai was silent for a long time. Finally, she shook her head and said calmly, wait for Jiang Qinsong. In Reki City, Wang Tianzong doesn't dare to do anything to Tianlan. She said softly, so, wait here. Is this place so important? Lin Fengting couldn't help asking. It's not important here. But Jiang Qinsong is important. If he's willing to cooperate with me, I'll give him a unique skill. Qin Weibai said calmly. Why? Lin Fengting frowned. Qin Weibai smiled lightly and said simply, because I want to live. Chapter 441. Qin Weibai wanted to live. This could be said to be the most comfortable sentence Lin Fengting had heard since he entered Eastern Europe. To some extent, standing by Samsara Palace was almost equivalent to standing at the highest point of the chaos in Eastern Europe. Because of the chaotic war in the Dark World, the chaos in Eastern Europe was all led by Samsara Palace. The Dark World had been noisy and bloody for more than 3 years. Samsara Palace had participated in it and quietly promoted the situation. Finally, the general trend had become the current situation. And it was not the military counselor of Samsara Palace who planned all this. It was Qin Weibai. It was not that no one in the Dark World had noticed the actions of Samsara Palace. But in the changing general trend, even if some discerning people had found some clues, they had long been unable to stop it. No one knew what Samsara Palace wanted. And as the situation developed, no one knew what Samsara Palace wanted. Or no one dared to believe it. Because from all the signs, no matter what the final chaos in Eastern Europe was, Samsara Palace was destined to be destroyed. Was the layout that took more than 3 years to destroy itself? How funny was that? Lin Fengting did not find it funny. But he could not describe this approach. Was it affection? Was it guilt? Or was it similar to a kind of sick sustenance? He could not evaluate it. But standing at his height, he could already see the ending in advance. Qin Weibai's tendency to self-destruct was too obvious. That emotion was so obvious that it had even infected the entire Samsara Palace. Anyone who was qualified to participate in this game could almost see it. But Lin Fengting did not want Qin Weibai to die in vain. Knowing Qin Weibai's origin, he could naturally understand why Lin Su had said that Qin Weibai was related to the future prosperity of the Lin clan. That was why Lin Fengting followed Qin Weibai. If Qin Weibai died, then everything he was doing now would be meaningless. And the most important problem was that Qin Weibai wanted to die. Lin Fengting had been calm on the surface, but he had long been troubled in the dark. He was now at the peak of the invincible realm, standing at the top of the dark world. But under the general trend of the entire dark world, even if his sword intent was superb, he did not know how to protect Qin Weibai, who wanted to die, in the midst of countless enemies. Now Qin Weibai wanted to live. This was undoubtedly the best news. Jiang Qiansong was known as Black Turtle in the Dark World, and his defense was unparalleled. If Samsara Palace could cooperate with Jiang Qiansong, it could greatly increase Qin Weibai's chances of survival. But the premise of all this was that Li Tianlan and the Jiang family of South America must win the battle. Only in this way could the desperate Jiang family of South America have the possibility to cooperate with the Samsara Palace. Lin Fengting glanced at Qin Weibai and thought, "Are you so confident that Li Tianlan can win?" Qin Weibai stood on the hillside in front of her. The night wind was blowing, and the wind blew up the hem of her windbreaker. Her hands were in her pockets, and her body was straight. She looked proud and lonely. In Lin Fengting's vision, there was only an exquisite and dreamy side profile. She looked up at the starry night sky with a worried look in her eyes. Worried about Li Tianlan? Lin Fengting asked in a gentle voice. Qin Weibai shook her head and suddenly said, "Who do you think His Highness is behind the follower?" Lin Fengting was stunned. Being able to drive a super expert close to the peak of the invincible realm, the strength of His Highness was self-evident. But as for who exactly it was, not a single clue. Lin Fengting shook his head and said slowly, "There must be a clue, but we haven't found it yet." Qin Weibai shook her head. Lin Fengting suddenly understood something. "Is it because of the appearance of His Highness that you want to live? How dare I die when such a person exists?" Qin Weibai said calmly, "I don't know who he is, but I can be sure of his origin. Before he appeared, I didn't think anyone in the dark world was my opponent. Wang Tianzong is very strong, deity is extreme, and the Lin clan is huge. But whether it's you, Wang Tianzong, or deity, you all have the limitations of this era. I can't defeat you, but I have plenty of ways to make you powerless." Her voice was cold and piercing, like the wind blowing from the polar region to Eastern Europe. But this so-called His Highness is different. He has no limitations. If I die, Tianlan will not be his opponent. This has nothing to do with talent and aptitude. Some advantages can never be made up for. Is it because of Tianlan that you want to live? Lin Fengting said softly. Qin Weibai did not speak. This question was meaningless. Have you ever thought about how you will face him in the future? Lin Fengting pondered for a moment and finally asked this question. Qin Weibai was still silent, but her body was a little stiff. There were lonely stars in the night. The cold moonlight fell down and shone on her face. Her face was pale and almost transparent. Lin Fengting sighed quietly. Everyone had their own world. That was the whole meaning of life in the world. Qin Weibai's world was Li Tianlan. Only Li Tianlan. But she had no face to face her own world. I will find him out. Qin Weibai said softly. In her mind, Li Tianlan might have many opponents. But only the mysterious highness was Li Tianlan's strongest opponent. That kind of advantage would almost make Li Tianlan have no chance of winning. She would find him out. As for what would happen after that, she did not say. Lin Fengting did not ask. I will go to see the follower in the near future and ask him for the list. Qin Weibai said suddenly. That's meaningless. Some important characters will definitely not be recorded. If the list is all, you can easily lock the identity of His Highness through that list. He won't be so stupid. Lin Fengting frowned. I have to take a look at it. Qin Weibai said softly, and it's not the only way. Lin Fengting said in a doubtful tone. The best way is to wait. If everything goes well in the end of the chaos in Eastern Europe, it will be an opportunity for him, an opportunity that I can't make up for at all. I may still not know who he is, but according to his reaction, I can determine his strength. Qin Weibai said calmly, if he doesn't appear in Eastern Europe, it's almost certain that he hasn't entered the invincible realm yet. Lin Fengting opened his mouth. The answer was a little unexpected, but when he thought about it, it didn't seem surprising. He lit a cigarette in silence and said nothing. Qin Weibai quietly looked at the silent mountains. This was the place where a long time ago, that incomparably pitiful man had massacred everyone for the sake of that hateful woman. Qin Weibai smiled. Her eyes were cold and calm without any temperature. The moonlight gathered on her. She raised her palms and looked at her hands. Her palms were slender, delicate, and extremely small. Compared with the whole of Eastern Europe, this hand was even more insignificant. But this was all her strength. Qin Weibai took a deep breath and stared at her palms. She would use all her strength and all her weapons to cover the sky of Eastern Europe, which was full of shadows. When the everlasting night passed and the polar sun rose, the whole dark world would inevitably enter a new era. Chapter 442. Even through the broken castle and the fierce fighting, Jiang Qinsong's whistle was clearly transmitted to Black Ghost's ears. Black Ghost heard the whistle that meant the signal to retreat, but he could not respond at all. For any aggressive combat unit, once it was suppressed in the battle, it often could not find a chance to turn over. And Black Ghost was not simply suppressed. His super attack power could not be exerted, his reaction speed could not keep up with the rhythm of the battle, and the shortcomings of weak defense were completely solved in the battle. Today, Black Ghost was completely crushed by Li Tianlan. Black Ghost could only retreat. Li Tianlan was between him and Jiang Qinsong. As a result, he kept running, and he could only get farther and farther away from Jiang Qinsong. The interior of the castle had been completely destroyed beyond recognition. The solid wooden stairs, the decorative armor, the bulletproof glass, the flower bed in the open air, the expensive furniture, and the electrical appliances had all been smashed. Huge cracks continued to spread on the walls. All the lights had been completely extinguished. There was no light in the castle, nor was there any light. Even the thunder and fire had completely disappeared. But the killing and fighting in the dark were getting crazier. All the power had been completely condensed by Li Tianlan. It did not spread, but concentrated to the apex. The subtle light often lit up in Li Tianlan's hands for a moment and then extinguished, and then became a crazy tide of power surging in the castle. Black Ghost kept dodging in the dark, but he could not get rid of Li Tianlan. The sound of the dragon fist broke the air in the darkness, and the sharp feeling of the space being torn came to his face. Black Ghost's retreating body moved 5 or 6 meters horizontally in an instant and rushed to the railing on the second floor of the castle. The roaring and surging power of the dragon fist drowned the multifunctional metal wall on one side. In the loud vibration, the wall collapsed completely. The light next door lit up for a moment and was directly destroyed by violence. The light shone for a moment. Black Ghost turned back in a hurry, but Li Tianlan's shadow was gone. Boom! In the time it took to turn around, the huge force had smashed all the railings on the second floor, and the broken objects were flying. Li Tianlan approached Black Ghost unreasonably and clasped his shoulders with both hands. At the moment when their bodies were close to each other, their forward and backward movements were already fast to the extreme. Li Tianlan pushed Black Ghost's body directly through the wall. The sound of stone collapsing was accompanied by the sound of metal covering. Black Ghost's arms instantly appeared with a layer of extremely fragile metal arm guards. Incomparably crazy attacks poured down like a torrential storm. Black Ghost had no time to pull out the knife. His arms shook together, and the moment the violent power gathered on his arms, the dragon roared. Black Ghost's fist, which was completely wrapped in metal, rushed out. Li Tianlan clenched his fist and slammed it on Black Ghost's arm guard. Blood splattered everywhere. Vaguely, Li Tianlan's fist had revealed his bones. The seemingly fragile but extremely tough arm guard was completely shattered by the punch. Black Ghost's body took advantage of the force to retreat, but as soon as his figure moved, the sense of deadly danger behind him was once again very close to him. The mournful whistle rang out again. Black Ghost became more and more anxious. The metal arm guard was already the third piece of life-saving equipment on his body. It should have been 3 opportunities to interrupt Li Tianlan's offensive and let him fight back, but Li Tianlan was getting crazier and crazier. Black Ghost didn't even dare to think about how serious Li Tianlan's current injury was. The fighting desire and aggression shown by the opponent was completely a madman. Regardless of everything, he went forward. No matter how serious the injury was, as long as he was not dead, he could continue to fight. Black Ghost stretched out his body. He was in the air, and his legs bounced lightly on the wall. He turned in an instant, trying to pass Li Tianlan and rush out of the castle. Li Tianlan rushed toward him. Black Ghost bounced in the opposite direction with the help of the wall. The figures of the two intersected for a moment. Black Ghost froze. At this moment, he didn't have time to figure out what it meant. In the violent loud noise, the wall behind him had suddenly collapsed. Li Tianlan turned back, and almost in the blink of an eye, he was in front of Black Ghost. Black Ghost did not hesitate and rushed straight forward. The instantaneous intersection had changed the position and direction of the two. Now in front of Black Ghost was the direction of Jianghu Qiansong. Rush! Black Ghost was rushing. Li Tianlan was also rushing. The condensed and violent power completely exploded around Li Tianlan. Thunderbolts and raging fire condensed into white lines flashing in the darkness. The lines were intertwined in the castle, dense like a net. Li Tianlan waved the giant net in his hand and chased after Black Ghost frantically, almost occupying the entire mountain area. The huge and somewhat exaggerated castle kept bursting and collapsing, and the crazy destructive power raged in every corner of the darkness. Li Tianlan went all the way, and everything around him was shattered and collapsed. The whole castle had begun to crack, and it seemed that it would collapse at any time. The violent attack covered the castle in an instant, and the power spread like an inescapable net. Black Ghost kept dodging, moving forward and backward, and the distance between him and Jianghu Qiansong became longer and shorter. The shrill whistle became more and more urgent. Black Ghost's heart was anxious and impatient, and his breathing became more and more rapid. Li Tianlan was the chosen one. But after all, he was not a real invincible realm expert. In this battle, he didn't feel the slightest majesty as an invincible realm expert. The other party just grasped one of his flaws, and then magnified it infinitely. This was a fighting style that just restrained him. He just needed a chance. A chance to block Li Tianlan's attack and then fight back in an instant. With his violent attack power that was enough to rank in the divine list, he could completely let the so-called chosen one fall here in the moment of the counterattack. He just needed a chance. Even if this chance was only for a second, or even half a second. The power that filled almost every inch of space was still surging. Black Ghost took a step forward. In this extremely delicate time, the shrill weight was still echoing. But the power that raged everything suddenly disappeared for a moment. Li Tianlan stopped where he was. In an instant, Black Ghost almost did not hesitate. He turned around and pulled out his knife. The knife light, which almost tore the world apart, solidified all the darkness in the castle in an instant. Li Tianlan's face was pale, and he looked up at the knife light. He knew that Black Ghost lacked a chance. So he gave Black Ghost a chance. The insanity devoured all his reason. In that state, Li Tianlan only knew to fight and did not guard against Black Ghost's change of direction. Now he changed his direction and rushed to Jiang Qiansong. Li Tianlan was not sure to break the stalemate between the two. At least he was not sure to break it before Black Ghost approached Jiang Qiansong. So he directly gave Black Ghost a chance. He took the initiative to stop, facing Black Ghost's strongest blow. The dark knife light was like a black arc in the night. Vaguely, Li Tianlan saw Black Ghost's eyes full of extreme violence behind the knife light. Li Tianlan smiled. The silver bracelet on his arm instantly turned into a silver long sword. Li Tianlan clenched the blade. He raised the sword to his eyebrows. In such a dark environment, no one would see this scene. Black Ghost would see this sword. But he would not have a chance to say anything again. The silver sword light lit up in the dark night. The sword light suddenly spread wildly in all directions. The silver light surrounded Li Tianlan like a ring. This sword intent was so illusory, not heavy, not sharp, and not even the slightest sharpness or aggressiveness. The light kept spreading, and the surrounding darkness frantically poured into the halo. The silver sword light became brighter and brighter. At this moment, Li Tianlan stood in the middle of the halo, and his figure was more real and clear than ever. The halo shone on the mess around, like a mirror, and even Black Ghost's knife light was clearly reflected. This scene was so familiar. It was especially so for Black Ghost. He suddenly opened his eyes wide. In an instant, his eyes were full of fear. It was not until this moment that he realized that his so-called need for a chance was not enough, far from enough. Li Tianlan raised the sword edge and closed his eyes. No one had seen his sword. In other words, before he truly feared no one, this sword should not have been known by the world. In the face of Jiang Qinyan's living with heaven and earth, Li Tianlan did not choose this sword when the situation was extremely critical. And now, the environment was just right, unknown. With this sword, Black Ghost must die. The blade of falling stars stabbed upwards with incomparable stability. This was his swordsmanship. In his swordsmanship, this sword might not be the strongest, but it was enough to bring the strongest fear to everyone. Li Tianlan had every reason to believe that if this sword was exposed now, Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, and even many people who were like enemies or friends or close to him would kill him at all costs. Because this sword represented a completely unknown path. It was the same as shattering, punishing heaven, and breaking the sea. This sword also had a name. Unparalleled style. Unparalleled in the world. Chapter 443. Li Tianlan stood in the light. Black Ghost stood in the darkness. In the blurred darkness, his expression was as if he had seen a ghost. Black Ghost himself was a ghost. So at this moment, seeing Li Tianlan's sword, Black Ghost even felt more terrible than seeing a living ghost. When he turned around and pulled out the knife with all his strength, he thought of many possibilities. Moreover, he was prepared for every possibility. But in any case, he did not expect to see Li Tianlan's sword. Unprecedented fear rose from his heart. In a dark environment, the light was clearly reflected in his sight. This was an indescribable sword light. Pure, bright, dazzling. Pure with almost no impurities. The turbulent darkness around continued to converge toward the light. A misty light swallowed the darkness, slowly spread, and completely wrapped Li Tianlan. There was nothing in the misty and bright sword light. At this moment, Li Tianlan didn't even have killing intent. The misty sword energy was slowly gathering. There was only light. Pure light. Inside the light, it was calm. Li Tianlan stood in the light curtain and looked at the darkness outside. The expression on his pale face was equally calm. Outside the light curtain, there was a monstrous killing intent. Black Ghost's face was full of fear and even despair. But he took the initiative to pull out the knife to fight back. This knife could not be turned back at all. In his sight, the sword light around Li Tianlan had stopped spreading. The light outlined a perfect circle in the darkness. The light reflected everything. Li Tianlan stood in the light, like standing in a mirror, as if he did not belong to this world. Black Ghost's knife light rushed over. His body also rushed over. After this knife, Black Ghost did not know what the end would be. But he was sure that if he did not use this knife, he would die. A desperate situation of life and death. This was a real no choice. Forward. He could only move forward. At the moment when light and darkness intertwined, Black Ghost suddenly let out a long howl like a beast. His eyes were filled with a strange red light for a moment. As the light and darkness were getting closer and closer, Black Ghost's knife momentum suddenly changed from a sweep to the most overbearing vertical cut. Blood burst out of Black Ghost's body at the moment when he forcibly reversed the knife momentum. Black Ghost's breath was instantly weak, but the knife light in the darkness became more and more crazy. He wanted a chance to fight back. Li Tianlan gave him the opportunity. But when Black Ghost seized this opportunity, he realized that he had a chance, but only once. If he couldn't kill Li Tianlan with this strike, there would be no future. So the Black Ghost burned everything. All the power, all the potential. As long as he could live, even if he was severely injured or even dropped in cultivation, it was not something he could not accept. The pure sword light was absorbing the darkness. Wherever the pitch-black saber light passed, the space would shatter inch by inch. A pitch-black arc of light that was several tens of meters long appeared in the pitch-black castle. The arc of light descended from above like a black lightning, crazily striking the pure sword light around Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan still maintained the posture of holding the sword with both hands. He raised his head quietly and looked at the knife light and Black Ghost jumping out of the darkness. The pitch-black arc of light collided with the pure sword light. The crazy and ruthless sharpness and killing intent tore at the pure mirror-like light at all costs. The light around Li Tianlan fluctuated violently, like boiling water, like a sudden surging tide. The collision of light and darkness spread around, and the obscure light penetrated the walls and the ceiling. With the position of the two as the center, everything within hundreds of meters of the castle turned into a piece of powder in an instant. The pitch-black saber light cut the light curtain around Li Tianlan wildly. Black Ghost had completely put down everything and madly slashed. Killing. Extinction. Annihilation. All the unique skills seemed to become the most common moves in his hands. Countless blood spurted out from his body as he waved his saber. Black Ghost howled miserably. Wherever the saber light passed, the pure sword light had been completely surrounded by dense black arcs of light. Li Tianlan's pure mirror-like sword light had been completely distorted, but in the face of Black Ghost's desperate attack, the light curtain had never been broken. Invincible. The light screen was so pure that it didn't have any sword chi or killing intent. This sword was pure light and didn't have any attack power, but it represented absolute defense. Black Ghost waved his saber wildly, and he didn't even know how many times he had waved. In fact, the first few sabers almost exhausted all Black Ghost's strength. The later countless sabers, the more powerful they were, the less powerful they were. The final few sabers were not even at the fire-flaming realm. But Black Ghost still persistently waved the weapon in his hand. His body was trembling. Looking at the unbreakable light curtain, his eyes had gradually become dull. His movements were getting slower and slower. But with his movements, the thin and somewhat ridiculous saber light was constantly waving, and the light curtain around Li Tianlan had been distorted to the limit. The dull sound of air bursting rang out. Pieces of pure light began to collapse. The entire light screen shattered, and countless light dots danced in the air as they rushed into the darkness, disappearing in an instant. There was no excitement in Black Ghost's eyes. Instead, he became extremely desperate. Sure enough, it was this sword. Unexpectedly, it was really this sword. Li Tianlan held falling stars with both hands, and the blade turned calmly. It was as if he had passed through a mirror that reflected light. In an instant, the light receded. The same pure silence and darkness without any impurities suddenly broke out in front of Li Tianlan. The sword energy rose to the sky and destroyed everything. Unparalleled style. Two completely different sword intents were the most complete unparalleled style. The pure light represented absolute defense. And pure darkness was the ultimate destruction. Boom! In the dark silence, there was a sudden earth-shattering explosion. The darkness completely swallowed Li Tianlan. The place where he was like an exploding black hole. The darkness, which was enough to swallow any light, burst out completely in an instant like a surging tsunami. Black Ghost was drowned. The broken castle hall was drowned. The open-air garden was drowned. The power of extreme destruction seemed to be endless, filling the castle in the blink of an eye. All the sounds of bursting and collapsing turned into a loud noise at the same time. Standing in this mountain area, Rekvia Castle, known as the strongest war fortress in Eastern Europe, completely collapsed in the sudden outbreak of the black tide. The pure dark sword intent rushed out of the castle, obscuring the starlight, mighty. Li Tianlan stood in the very center of the darkness, his body trembling violently. At this point, the gene potion he had taken before finally lost its effect with his full strength. The injury from the battle with Jiang Qinyan. The injury from the battle with Jiang Qiansong. The injury from the joint attack of Black Ghost and Jiang Qiansong. The internal and external injuries, every wound was gushing blood. The injury began to bite back at the body like never before. Li Tianlan's eyes turned black. His body shook, and he tried his best to concentrate his will and not let himself fall to the ground. The blood completely dyed his broken white cloud silk clothes red. Li Tianlan, covered with blood and dust, looked like a beggar. But in the darkness, his whole person was full of unprecedented majesty. Because after the darkness dissipated, the African Black Ghost, who was strong enough to be on the holy list, was kneeling in front of him in the most humiliating way. The dark sword intent completely wiped out all his vitality. The sword light passed through every inch of his body. Every muscle on his body was completely torn by the sword intent, and even his internal organs had become fragmented. The vitality kept disappearing in his body. His body trembled. Before he died, he didn't even feel fear, just obvious doubts and puzzlement. Why? Black Ghost struggled to raise his head. He seemed to realize how humiliating his posture was. He tried to move and seemed to want to turn over. Bang! In the subtle sound, one of his slightly exerted arms suddenly exploded. The blood mist flew and scattered on Black Ghost. Black Ghost's face was completely distorted, but his eyes were fixed on Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and looked at Black Ghost. This was the first time he had killed an invincible realm expert with his own strength. It was not the outbreak of life that he gave up in Heaven Capital. No one paid the price. He also paid the price. The dual wind and thunder veins had become dual veins of wind and thunder. The imperfect unparalleled style was destined to be difficult to appear for a long time. His injury had reached the limit, and then he needed careful nursing, but he killed an invincible realm expert. So Li Tianlan was now in the mood to chat with Black Ghost. Why what? His voice was hoarse and weak. The Chosen One. The road of the Chosen One. Illusion and reality. Why is there light and darkness? Why can it be at the same time? At the same time, he tried to gasp to express his meaning. For nearly 500 years in the Dark World, the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai had been standing at the peak of the Dark World. The 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation represented the extreme of swordsmanship and the extreme of martial arts. Above the extreme was the real road of the Chosen One. So there were only 2 ways to become the Chosen One in the Dark World. Many experts in the Dark World knew what this was, but they might not be able to do it. The sword intent of the 24 moves of sword reached the extreme. Beyond the extreme, it was the sword intent of reality and illusion. It was sharp and unparalleled, destroying everything. The road of the 6 paths of reincarnation surpassed the extreme, which was light and darkness. This was the strongest outbreak, and it was a two-sided outbreak. Light was the ultimate defense, and darkness was the absolute destruction. Between day and night, the attack power and defense power of the outbreak almost doubled. These were the only 2 roads of the Chosen One that could be seen in the dark world. The Jianghu family of South America was not qualified to take such a road. However, Wuxia Xianxia and Black Ghost joined forces with the help of the domain of 30-meter mortal world, combining defense and attack, and they could infinitely close to this point. That was, infinitely close to perfection. This was also the reason why the Jianghu family of South America was full of confidence in Eastern Europe. When Wuxia Xianxia and Black Ghost joined forces, they could almost fight against the experts at the peak of the invincible realm. Because they represented an incomparably perfect road. And now, Li Tianlan. After the sword intent of reality and illusion, the move of unparalleled just now, the alternation of light and darkness, the conversion of day and night, was clearly another road of true perfection. Why, Black Ghost muttered to himself, still persistent, 2 roads of the Chosen One, reality and illusion, light and darkness, why do you? Li Tianlan frowned. What nonsense is this? He glanced at Black Ghost and said, martial arts is martial arts. What's the use of these fancy things? His body moved and he took a step forward. This step seemed to destroy the balance of the whole space. The darkness of nothingness surged over and completely wrapped Black Ghost. Black Ghost opened his mouth, only uttered a syllable, and the whole person was completely swallowed by the darkness. His figure broke up little by little in the darkness, turned into flesh and blood, and turned into dust. Black Ghost died. At the same time, Li Tianlan began to bleed all over. The blood washed the dust on his body, extremely red and mournful. He knelt on the ground, dizzy, and could hardly stand up for a while. No one could have predicted that this would be the result of this battle. The invincible realm died. The Chosen One was bathed in blood. Li Tianlan clenched his fists and struggled to stand up. In the darkness, his voice sounded low, very hoarse, but very firm. I also have a sword. Chapter 444. Jianghu state was still silent. It was still noisy on the international stage. The meeting of the United Nations had long since ended, but great pressure was still surging toward Jianghu state. From morning to night, this was destined to be an abrupt and subtle day. Wulan state, Oga state, and Ra state completely fell out with Jianghu state. All the major powers in the world exerted pressure on Jianghu state. The turbulent day gradually came to an end. Countless conspiracies were brewing in a frenzied and noisy atmosphere. Only a few people found that in this general trend, Wulan state, Oga state, and Ra state, which should have been the most excited, were suddenly silent. They became as silent as Jianghu state. Since the evening, the spokespersons of the 3 countries had never made any remarks against Jianghu state. Because they had lost contact with Schenker, the patriarch of the Rekvia family. The Rekvia castle was very close to Reki city. In the shortest time since the battle in the castle, the high-level officials of Wulan state had already received the news. It was a chaotic battle on the satellite surveillance screen. Jiang Qinsong, Black Ghost, Li Tianlan, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, countless experts of the Rekvia family, Dark Swordmaster Qin Shilai. In the light and shadow that filled the whole scene, most of the high-level officials of Wulan state were watching this scene in silence. They did not see Schenker, the patriarch of the Rekvia family. But they saw Jiang Qinsong and Black Ghost attacking the Rekvia castle. In the high-level conference room of Reki city, every high-level official of Wulan state who saw this scene felt a little strange. No matter what the situation was, at least now it seemed that Rekvia had changed its camp and stood in Li Tianlan's camp. What an embarrassing situation this was. 12 hours ago, Wulan state had taken the initiative to declare war on Jianghu state. If Rekvia joined the camp of Jianghu state, how could Wulan state deal with itself? The declaration of war between Wulan state and Jianghu state was the result of the strong influence of the Rekvia family. In capitalist countries, capital itself had unimaginable magic and power. The entire Rekvia family was a huge monster entrenched in the 5 Eastern European countries. Their capital controlled all the important industries in several countries. Countless parliamentarians, generals, and senior officials kept in touch with them. All the media spoke for them. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as the Patriarch of Rekvia wanted to, he could easily resound throughout the 5 Eastern European countries with a cough. Wulan state might have the power to resist Rekvia. But the government of Wulan state did not. Xianxia ordered Wulan state to declare war on Jianghu state. As long as someone did not execute it, whether it was the president or the prime minister, they would be ousted the next day. This was the power of capital. That was why the senior officials of Wulan state felt embarrassed. In less than 24 hours after the country declared war with Jianghu state, Rekvia shook hands with Jianghu state. How would Wulan state face Jianghu state? Every senior executive was silent, and the atmosphere in the conference room was as stiff as ice. Many people here were related to the Rekvia family, and some even came from the Rekvia family. But from their political standpoint, no matter what relationship they had with Rekvia, everyone felt ashamed when they thought of the situation after Rekvia shook hands with Jianghu state. The communication screen in the conference room suddenly changed. An old general with a grizzled beard appeared on the screen, his expression solemn and dignified. All the higher-ups focused their attention on him at the same time. The old general saluted with a solemn face, took a deep breath, and slowly said, "Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, the Grand Duke of England, the Queen of the Shadow Throne of the European Union, King Tong Rothschild, requests to enter Reki City." The president of Wulan state, whose expression was calm and almost numb, did not speak. The prime minister on the side was slightly shocked. Rothschild was the top wealthy family in Europe, which was enough to keep pace with the Wang family of Beihai. Such a family dominated the United Kingdom and had been Grand Dukes for generations. In this generation, the title of Grand Duke fell on King Tong of Rothschild. She was not the Patriarch of Rothschild. But the title of Queen of the Shadow Throne and Grand Duke of Rothschild was enough to show that at this moment, Rothschild and the Shadow Throne, which could be said to be supreme in Western Europe, had set their sights on Reki City at the same time. There was a long silence. The communication never hung up. After an unknown period of time, a noise suddenly sounded from the screen. Another voice sounded on the screen. It was also a report, but it sounded from the old general's communication device. The old general did not block the call, so the news reported to the old general was directly transmitted to the ears of all the high-level officials of Wulan state. Report, General, His Highness Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, His Highness Mellad, the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps, and His Highness Chaos, the Grand Knight of Knights Templars, request to enter Reki City. The old general on the screen froze for a moment, then looked at the high-level officials in the conference room and fell silent. There was a sound of rapid breathing in the depressing conference room. The president, who was expressionless, moved his body, glanced at the old general, and nodded slightly. The old general hesitated, nodded slightly, picked up the communication device, and said in a deep voice, "Let them go. It seems that the situation is not that bad." The president, who had been silent for a long time, smiled, and his smile was a little self-deprecating. The Snowdance Corps, the Jiang family of South America, the Qin clan of Eastern Europe, Rothschild, the Vatican, and Knights Templars. In a small place like Wulan state, there were 6 major forces involved in the competition in a day. Plus the local Rekvia of Wulan state. The situation was extremely chaotic. But, we always have to find someone to cooperate with. The president of Wulan state said slowly. Before the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, the entire dark world in Eastern Europe was controlled by the Polar Ground Alliance. The Polar Ground Alliance was controlled by the 4 major families in Eastern Europe. The 4 families, who controlled countless interests, transferred the interests of the Dark World to the countries in Eastern Europe. Therefore, when the Polar Ground Alliance existed, the countries in Eastern Europe did not worry about the war in the Dark World. But now that the Polar Ground Alliance had collapsed, Wulan State, which was controlled by Rekvia, suddenly seemed extremely fragile. Under such circumstances, Wulan State must find a dark force to cooperate with, just like East Island chose the Purgatory of Heaven capital at the beginning. The war in the Dark World was sometimes very huge, and sometimes very small. But it was undeniable that every large-scale conflict in the Dark World was extremely sensitive. The focus of the Dark World's competition was basically related to the fate of the country. No country dared to let an uncontrolled Dark World develop unscrupulously in its own territory. Therefore, many countries had only two choices in the face of foreign forces, either to expel or to cooperate. In the case of the latter, it was usually because these countries did not have enough power to carry out the expulsion. This was the last resort. Wulan State's geographical location was extremely important, and it had always been a battleground for military forces. More than 20 years ago, Jianghu State established the Arctic Ocean Command, and the best target was Wulan State. At that time, the Li family of Jianghu State was like the sun at high noon, and the two highnesses were invincible. With the full support of Jianghu State and the assistance of the Wang family of Beihai, the Arctic Ocean Command experienced countless wars before and after its establishment. The Li family, which had countless chips, encountered the unified rejection and resistance of all the European powers and wealthy families in Eastern Europe, including Rothschild. In the end, the Li family still opened up a situation in Eastern Europe and established the Arctic Ocean Command. But there was no room for the Li family to intervene in the 5 Eastern European countries with Wulan State as the core. Wulan State was a large European country, rich in all kinds of resources and a world-famous granary. Its location determined its importance. Between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, Wulan State was the most important focus and the most natural channel. Moreover, the coastline of Wulan State could go straight to Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and East Asia. It was no exaggeration to say that if Jianghu State had occupied this place back then, it would have contained the throat of the entire Europe. The major powers in Western Europe were not interested in the Arctic Ocean Command in Eastern Europe. They just did not want the Li family to occupy Wulan State and pose too much threat to themselves in their rear. In fact, they did. The Arctic Ocean Command was established. The Li family withdrew from Eastern Europe. However, the entire Arctic Ocean Command in Eastern Europe was completely cut off by several countries around Wulan State. For more than 20 years, its deterrent was still seriously insufficient. Now the Polar Ground Alliance had collapsed, and Jianghu State had made a comeback. It was still the Li family, and it was still as chaotic as before. But the current Li family was not as good as it was in the past. At present, any superpower that entered Wulan State was fully interested in cooperating with Wulan State. Wulan State could choose Jianghu State, Rothschild, the Vatican, and the Jiang family of South America, but everything was just in theory. In such a chaotic situation, if Wulan State, which was not strong in comprehensive national strength, rashly chose, it would only bring disaster to itself. The president thought silently and suddenly broke the silence in the conference room. Reki City opens all the city defenses. There was a moment of silence in the conference room, and then it was drowned in an uproar. The president looked at the incredible expressions of many high-level officials and said calmly, "Now Wulan State is the freest, but also the most powerless. We have to cooperate with other forces in any case. In this case, let's open the city defense, let all forces come in, and let them fight." He paused and said flatly, "We will only choose the winner." The communication in the conference room was suddenly connected again. The old general's figure appeared on the screen again. His expression was still serious, but the muscles at the corners of his eyes were constantly trembling at this time. The president looked at him and did not speak. Everyone, the old general's voice was extremely low, so it sounded very weak. "I've got the news," his voice was like a dying moan. "The Sword Emperor of Jianghu State, Wang Tianzong, has entered Reki City and is currently heading for Rekvia Castle." The uproar in the conference room suddenly became dead silent. Wang Tianzong. The Sword Emperor of Jianghu State. The first on the divine list. Not to mention his Wang family of Beihai. He was alone. For a country with weak national strength like Wulan State, Wang Tianzong alone represented a power that Wulan State could not resist. No one dared to speak. No one in the conference room could see Wang Tianzong. But just by hearing this name, everyone seemed to feel the majesty of a monarch descending from the North Sea to Eastern Europe. The majesty of the Sword Emperor. The Wang family of Beihai also intervened. The president's palm trembled for a moment, and he suddenly asked, "Where is the Snowdance Corps?" "Less than 20 kilometers from Reki City." The old general's tone was heavy. "How are their losses?" The president took a deep breath, and his eyes suddenly became extremely sharp. "More than 2/3 of the 3,000 people have been lost, but they have marched all the way through 6 large elite legions of ours. At present, nearly half of the military of Wulan State has been completely defeated by the Snowdance Corps." The old general said with a wry smile, "It is expected that they will arrive outside Reki City in 40 minutes at most." "President, what should we do?" In the conference room, a hot-tempered senior military official suddenly stood up and asked loudly. "Wait." The president's tone was low and brief. "At present, we can only wait. Everyone, tonight's change may not be enough to determine the future of Eastern Europe, but it is enough to determine the future of Wulan State. We only choose the winner, no matter who it is, so." He stood up and bowed deeply to all the senior officials in the conference room. "Please support me." Everyone looked at the president, and no one spoke. Everyone understood that the fate of Wulan State depended on the victory or defeat of several major forces. They could do nothing now. After the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, the most vulnerable side of Wulan State completely broke out tonight, making every senior official of Wulan State helpless. They could choose. But they could only choose the winner. But there was only one winner. So the so-called choice, in fact, was that they had no choice. Chapter 445. You sat on the boat and watched the scenery. The person who watched the scenery was watching you upstairs. His sight passed through the hazy misty rain of West Lake. The rippling surface of the lake brought about dense mist. The bell rang from the temple not far away. The bell spread in all directions, distant and empty. West Lake in the rain was extremely beautiful. In a trance, all he could see were sceneries. West Lake, bright moon tower. He sat in an elegant private room filled with the fragrance of tea. Through the window, his eyes had been looking at a lonely boat on the lake. The lonely boat was far away from Bright Moon Tower, so far that the lonely boat seemed very small. Because the person on the lonely boat was even smaller. The boat on the water was faintly discernible, drifting aimlessly. A vague figure was sitting on the bow of the boat. He seemed to be fishing, motionless, and looked extremely quiet. In the private room, he watched quietly, picked up the slightly cold tea on the table, and took a sip. The wind suddenly blew outside the window. As the wind passed, it rolled up the hazy misty rain, wrinkled the surface of the lake, and disturbed the leisurely spreading ripples and the lonely boat. The boat swayed in the wind, getting closer to Bright Moon Tower. His hand that was drinking tea paused slightly. Looking at the vague figure fishing on the boat, he narrowed his eyes. It's still too late after all. He put down the teacup and whispered to himself. What's too late? An old voice rang out. The door of the private room was pushed open, and an old man about 60 years old came in. He gently stroked the teacup and did not speak. He did not like to explain, and he did not want to say too much in front of his own people. What is His Majesty looking at? The old man asked again. There were only 2 majesties recognized in the world. One was in the Vatican. The other was in Beihai. Nowadays, only a few people knew that in addition to these 2, there was another majesty in the dark world. Almost no one knew his identity and origin. And those who knew would not tell others. So at present, His Majesty was simply a perfect secret figure. He sat in the corner of the private room, and the dim light shrouded his figure. He smiled, knocked on the table, looked at the lake outside the window, and whispered, "I'm watching the night." His voice was calm and indifferent, neither too fast nor too slow, which sounded very magnetic. The old man glanced out of the window blankly. It was raining in Lindman. But when night fell in Eastern Europe, it happened to be daytime here. Although the weather was gloomy, how could there be night? The boat on the lake came nearer. Following His Majesty's gaze, the old man finally discovered something. He frowned and suddenly cried out involuntarily, "Wei Kunlun." He should be a saint. His eyes were steady and firm as he looked at the lake. The night is too bright. He is not a threat on the trip to Eastern Europe. You want to kill him? The old man's eyes were still filled with shock, but the light of contemplation began to surge in the depths of his eyes. "If I go all out," I said, "it's too late." His Majesty shook his head. The old man fell silent. After a while, he shook his head with a wry smile. "I didn't expect that the strongest sword master of Mount Shu would be the first super master of Samsara Palace. There's nothing strange about that. Similarly, no one would have thought that the deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican would be my disciple." His Majesty stood up, poured a cup of tea for the old man, pointed to the opposite side of him, and said casually, "Sit down." The old man sat down and looked seriously at His Majesty's face, which was a little blurred in the shadows. "The disciple is still in the Vatican. Do you really want to get involved in the Vatican?" His Majesty paused, then shook his head with a smile. "Of course not. The Pope is unfathomable, and the Vatican has a transcendent status and powerful strength, but there are too many restrictions. I'm not interested in the Vatican. The reason why the disciple stays there is that he was already there when I found him. In fact, how to let the disciple leave the Vatican is also one of the things I've thought about most in recent years. If this matter is not done well, it may be a problem in the future. The Holy Disarmament Corps has a sensitive position. If you want the disciple to leave the Vatican, you must let him leave the Holy Disarmament Corps first." The old man frowned. "I know." His Majesty said lightly, "Wait until the matter in Eastern Europe is over. Eastern Europe is an opportunity. If possible, I'd like the disciple to kill Arsis." The old man raised his eyebrows, looking blank and confused. "Arsis and I had a grudge back then." His Majesty's tone was cold. The corners of the old man's mouth twitched. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. It had been more than 30 years since the Pope of the Vatican was elected. Arsis had been in charge of the Holy Disarmament Corps for more than 20 years. In the state of coronation, Arsis could be said to be second only to the Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong, and even comparable to deity. He really didn't know what grudge His Majesty had with Arsis. When I passed by Europe, I wanted to invite their Holy Virgin to dinner. Listen, it was just a meal to discuss some things. There was no other meaning. But Arsis thought that I had profaned the inviolable glory of the Holy Virgin. Hey, 2 invincible realm experts and hundreds of advanced saint warriors chased me for nearly 600 kilometers. Of course, I have to remember this. His Majesty sneered, and his tone was full of indifference. The old man hesitated. The disciple was still in the Vatican. He really didn't want to become enemies with the Vatican. If possible, he still hoped that His Majesty could let go of these grudges. "Your Majesty, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican has a very high status in the Vatican. In terms of her identity, she really won't eat alone with a strange man." "What you did," the old man said in a euphemistic tone. "I know." His Majesty interrupted him. "If that's all, I don't want to care about it. You know, I also have faith, although I'm not a Christian. But no one can deny my piety. Do you think that a firm faith will be completely shattered by a powerful force? Absolutely not." The old man shook his head firmly. "So, Your Majesty, it's understandable that Arsis chased you." "I don't understand." His Majesty shook his head and said with a sneer, "If a devout faith really can't be defeated, then why didn't I invite their Holy Virgin to dinner back then? But it didn't take long for Arcis and the Pope to give their Holy Virgin to another man. The Pope was even willing to preside over their wedding in person and even keep her identity as the Holy Virgin. Ha, a married Holy Virgin? How ridiculous is that? The old man opened his mouth and looked at His Majesty dully. He didn't speak for a long time. He asked the Pope and the commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps to give their Holy Virgin away and even allowed the married Holy Virgin to keep her identity as the Holy Virgin. In the old man's impression, it seemed that there had never been such a powerful and frightening figure in the dark world. This was tantamount to overturning the entire Vatican with his own strength. How insignificant was the Vatican in front of the other party that they would compromise like this? The old man's tone was bitter. It seems that no Holy Virgin of the Vatican has ever married, of course. His Majesty said expressionlessly, the Holy Virgin that they regarded as a treasure had no value in the other party's eyes. The Vatican was willing to marry her, but that person didn't bother to marry her. So in the end, the so-called Holy Virgin still kept her name, but she followed that person for no reason. When I met that person, the so-called Holy Virgin poured me a cup of tea. Holy Virgin. Oh. Holy Virgin. He took out a cigarette, slowly lit it, and calmly said, "Let me tell you a story." Go ahead. The old man's tone was respectful. 20 years ago? Or 30 years ago? There used to be a chosen one in Jianghu state. The old man listened in silence, without saying a word. It's just that the chosen one also had a woman he liked. Unfortunately, that year, the Jianghu family of South America spent countless resources to kidnap the chosen one's woman. In order to resist the great pressure brought by the chosen one, the Jianghu family of South America invited the Pope, Arcis, the Heroes Club, and Fantasy World, several superpowers, intending to fight against the other party together. Just for that woman, His Majesty smiled. That man, who was either a fool or a chosen one, killed all the way from South America to Eastern Europe. He swept the 6 secret bases of the Jianghu family of South America and slaughtered nearly 13,000 elites of the Jianghu family of South America. Finally, he found the woman in the secret base in Eastern Europe. And then? The old man couldn't help asking, feeling like he was listening to a story. And then? His Majesty said indifferently, 3 invincible realm experts who were strong enough to be on the divine list died on the spot. The entire secret base was in disorder. Thousands of elites were killed. Arcis was seriously injured. The Jianghu family of South America suffered heavy losses. As for the Pope, he avoided the chosen one's 5 swords in a row. Finally, he couldn't stand the 6th sword and took the initiative to compromise. Even when the so-called Holy Virgin went to serve tea and warm the bed, he didn't dare to revoke her title. The old man had completely shut up, and his eyes were full of fascination. When the nobility and dignity of the beautiful Holy Virgin were associated with serving tea and warming the bed, some of the reveries in it were enough to stimulate any man. Including the old man. Just listen to it as a story. His Majesty put out the cigarette butt and smiled. It's a story. The old man nodded with a hollow smile. Go to Eastern Europe now. His Majesty said calmly, in the chaos of Wulan state, if nothing goes wrong, Li Tianlan will win. Lin Fengting is with Qin Weibai, so it's impossible for the Qin clan not to help Li Tianlan. Jiang Qiansong has no hope of turning the tables, so he will retreat to his secret base in Eastern Europe as soon as possible. I can know the location of the secret base, so there's no reason that Qin Weibai doesn't know. I've sent someone to keep an eye on it. All the manpower is at your disposal. Don't have any conflict with Qin Weibai. There's only one thing you have to do. If Jiang Qiansong can escape from Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting's blockade and make sure that we won't be exposed, save him. I have great use for him. The old man froze and looked at the time. It should be more than 7:00 in the evening in Wulan state now. It would take him at least 10 hours to get from Lin and to Wulan state. Is it too late? The old man asked. It's just a casual move. If Jiang Qiansong is lucky, it's naturally too late. If he dies, just follow the original plan. His Majesty shook his head and said calmly, I'll go to Eastern Europe a little later. But to go, I have to determine the state of some people who may affect the situation. As he spoke, his eyes were fixed on Wei Kunlun. Wei Kunlun. No, Saint, he may pose a threat. But for now, he has no hope of breaking through and is not a threat. His Majesty shook his head. Who is military counselor? The old man suddenly asked. How do I know? His Majesty asked in reply. Looking at the old man's incredible expression, he smiled and said, I know a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that I'm omniscient and omnipotent. Some things are secrets, and they are secrets. How can I know who is military counselor? But Saint is not a threat, and military counselor's current state is not much better. Neither of them is a threat. The old man was silent for a while, then nodded and said, Since the two strongest supermasters of the Samsara Palace are not a threat, who told you that Saint and military counselor are the strongest supermasters of the Samsara Palace? His Majesty said calmly. The old man suddenly froze on the spot. Qin Weibai has contributed a lot to the Samsara Palace's success today. She is an amazing woman, but remember, when she is your enemy, you can't believe everything she says or does. When His Majesty talked about Qin Weibai, there was undisguised appreciation in his eyes. She is an awe-inspiring woman, so I will help her and kill her in the chaos of Eastern Europe. This is the only, maybe not the only one. A low voice suddenly sounded at the door. A middle-aged man in a white shirt with a calm and dignified bearing came in. The old man looked up and was stunned. The middle-aged man was also stunned when he saw the old man. The next second, the two laughed at the same time and shook hands. Secretary Wang, His Majesty greeted him with a smile, welcome. The person who came to the Bright Moon Tower at such a delicate time was Wang Jinglei, the current member of the decision-making committee of Jianghu State, the core member of the Wang family of Beihai, and the top leader of Wuxia province. Wang Jinglei waved his hand with a smile, sat opposite His Majesty, and said with a smile, We are all on the same side. Why are you so polite? Chapter 446. The idiot called Wang Jinglei. It has been changed. Wang Jinglei said that he and His Majesty were on the same side. What everyone knew was that he and the other king were truly on the same side. The rift within the Wang family of Beihai was getting bigger and bigger, and Wang Jinglei was definitely the focus of it. But even so, no one dared to say that Wang Jinglei and Wang Tianzong would completely break up. Even if he finally ascended to the commanding heights of Jianghu State and stood at the peak of the highest power in Jianghu State. No one thought that Wang Jinglei would have such courage. But today, the ordinary-looking old man looked at Wang Jinglei thoughtfully and then at His Majesty who was sitting in the shadow. An idea suddenly came to his mind. Was the cause, or the starting point, of the rift in the Wang family of Beihai in recent years? It seemed that although His Majesty had been hiding in the dark in recent years, he had done something. Although it was hard to believe that he could do this, the old man knew very well that there were always some people who had advantages that most people would not have in their lives. The old man thought and glanced at His Majesty in the shadow. His Majesty didn't respond. The old man thought about it. Since His Majesty didn't let him go now, he simply sat down beside him. His Majesty's expression was still calm. So Wang Jinglei was completely relieved. Wasn't his saying that he was on the same side as His Majesty? From their current standpoint, he was sure that he and His Majesty were on the same side, but Wang Jinglei was not sure that the old man appeared here. Now he sat down, and His Majesty didn't object, which meant that the other party was indeed on the same side. Wang Jinglei smiled, looked at the calm old man, and said with a smile, General, I didn't expect to see you here. It's an accident and a surprise. He stood up and reached out to the old man. The old man, who was really important in Jianghu State but didn't have a strong sense of existence, reached out to hold Wang Jinglei's palm, and said in a hoarse voice, I didn't expect to see the secretary here either. The secretary was not an ordinary secretary. The general was not an ordinary general either. One of the 4 spirits of Jianghu state, Admiral of 9 Serenities, Shang. His code name was Vermilion Bird. In the shadow, His Majesty straightened up and said with a smile, "Secretary Wang, let me introduce you. This is my 3rd follower." Among the 4 spirits of Jianghu state, except for Black Tortoise who was still young, the other 3 were the top superiors of the half-step invincible realm in the Dark World. The 2nd commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican. The Sword Sage of East Island. The General of Jianghu State. They were all disciples. They were all big spenders. Wang Qinglei shook Shang's old and thin palm hard, looked at His Majesty in the shadow, and smiled peacefully. "It seems that you are going to make a big move in Eastern Europe? Are they targeting Qin Weibai? You seem to have a different opinion?" His Majesty asked with a smile. "It's just an idea." Qin Weibai's charm was unparalleled. Her appearance, temperament, scheming, and wits were all impeccable. It would be a pity to kill such a beautiful woman. If she could become your woman, who would be your opponent in this era? It's much better for you to be with Qin Weibai than for her to be with Li Tianlan. At least in my heart, you and her are truly made for each other. Wang Qinglei said in a gentle voice. His Majesty did not speak for a while. The shadow he was in was a little dim, and Wang Qinglei could see that he was in a trance. This trance passed in a flash, and then it became absolute reason and calmness. "It's impossible." His tone was cold and deep. "Oh." Wang Qinglei raised his eyebrows. "Even if I can get all the women in the world, I can't get Qin Weibai." His Majesty's tone was complicated. "The world wants to live, but she wants to die." "Why?" Wang Qinglei froze for a moment. "Because of guilt, right?" His Majesty laughed. "Maybe it's also because of deep love?" "How do I know?" "She's not an ordinary woman. Everyone has their own world, and everyone's world is wonderful. But maybe only her world is boring. So boring that there's only snow, blood, and Li Tianlan. This is her world, the world she has no face to face." He turned the teacup in his hand and said flatly, "No one can get her. I can't get her, and neither can Li Tianlan. Everything she did in Eastern Europe was a self-destructive plan. When she dies, what's the point of gains and losses? But if," Shang suddenly opened his mouth and said slowly, "what if she knows the existence of your Majesty?" There was no need to assume this question. Because Qin Weibai already knew the existence of this Majesty. She will want to survive. Because she can't rest assured about Li Tianlan. His Majesty said, "But it's all meaningless. The reason why I appear in her sight at this time is that nothing can be changed. She has done all this. How can she survive under the general trend? At this time, even if she wants to live, she has no chance. But there will be variables." Wang Qinglei said. If Qin Weibai survived the chaos in Eastern Europe, it was definitely not a good thing for the people present. "I allow variables to exist," His Majesty said, "although it's also very helpless, because I can't grasp the direction of the chaos in Eastern Europe. Qin Weibai will die, but the ending she wants may not necessarily appear. I have to help her, because the new era she wants to create is what I need most. So I simply jumped out." He smiled and turned to look at Shang. "So, when you go to Eastern Europe this time, you must pay attention to a few people." "Go ahead," Shang said calmly. The first is naturally His Majesty Sword Emperor. But with Secretary Wang, you can get a lot of information about His Majesty Sword Emperor, so his threat is the lowest. Shang didn't speak and listened quietly. The second is Qin Weibai. Remember, don't expose your relationship with me under any circumstances. As for the third, Shang still didn't speak. Without His Majesty's words, he knew that the third person His Majesty mentioned was Lin Fengting. It could only be Lin Fengting. "It's the Qin clan." His Majesty gave an unexpected answer. The first branch of the Lin clan had a deep foundation in Eastern Europe. Pay attention to the Qin clan's movements, which can even affect the whole situation. The fourth, Shang looked up at His Majesty and thought that the fourth must be Lin Fengting. It's tribulation. Tribulation? Shang and Wang Qinglei were both surprised. Why not Lin Fengting? Lin Fengting is terrible, but some enemies don't have to be defeated. At present, in the chaos in Eastern Europe, the only one who can really sweep everything unscrupulously is His Majesty Sword Emperor, so we need to pay attention to him. Only Qin Weibai can overturn the overall situation quietly, so we also need to pay attention to her. The Qin clan has a deep foundation in Eastern Europe and can't be ignored either. In addition to these three parties, what I've mentioned are those who would rather die to protect Li Tianlan. Tribulation can do this, but his current state should be a little special. When you go to Eastern Europe, you need to send people to stand up to Tribulation and the Holy Virgin Angel of the Vatican. Shang stared silently. He was very old, but at this moment, looking at His Majesty in front of him, he finally thought of a term that belonged to young people. It was a term that his granddaughter would repeat when she played games all day. A cheat. For this era, His Majesty in front of him was a real cheat. And Qin Weibai was also a cheat. The point was that they were all controlled by the cheat in front of them. At this time, the chosen one in Eastern Europe had turned the more terrifying cheat into a woman who could warm his bed. Shang's mind was a little scattered. He couldn't help but think of Eastern Europe and the changes in Reki City. Reki City was changing. But the large mountainous area outside Reki City was still calm. It had just rained, and the night sky was clear and bright, accompanied by the night light. Qin Weibai still stood there quietly, as silent as a statue. Many people had seen Qin Weibai, who was known as a goddess. She was as cold as an otherworldly being. She was arrogant and kept people 1,000 miles away. She was calm and indifferent, but there was a thunderous wisdom in silence. She was calm and composed when she wandered among the top figures in the dark world. She drove the whole Samsara palace to ride the wind and waves in the dark world. Li Tianlan had also seen Qin Weibai's charm and enchanting, which was unknown to outsiders. Only Flaming Fire and Lin Fengting had seen Qin Weibai's silence. When she was silent, she would stand or sit motionless, like a statue. She was not serious, but she gave people a very heavy feeling. It seemed that she was recalling something, thinking about something, and longing for something. At this time, Qin Weibai seemed to unconsciously take off all her clothes. In the moonlight, under the starry sky, she stood there with a kind of unbearable loneliness. It was an indescribable pale emotion that was difficult to describe. It carried the coldest loneliness and despair. Lin Fengting took the initiative to break the silence and said calmly, "We are here. If Jiang Qiansong comes, how likely is it that he will escape?" "I don't know. It depends on Jiang Qiansong's specific injury, but the biggest possibility is no more than 30%. Qin Weibai thought for a moment and said calmly, "Have you ever thought about what if he insists on not compromising?" Lin Fengting laughed. No one was willing to die. That was the truth. But if every invincible realm expert was really afraid of death, it was impossible for him to break through to the invincible realm. Jiang Qiansong was famous for his defense. The Jiang family of South America had developed technology and all kinds of strange defensive equipment. If Jiang Qiansong was unwilling to compromise and fought for the 20% to 30% chance, the possibility was not low. It may not be very likely that he will compromise with us. Qin Weibai said, "But I prepared a fig leaf for him today." She looked down the mountain. At 7:45 p.m. in Wulan State, Eastern Europe, a white figure slowly came to the secret base of the Jiang family of South America in Eastern Europe. Qin Weibai saw him. He also saw Qin Weibai. Lin Fengting looked at the figure at the foot of the mountain and raised his eyebrows in surprise. Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State. Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State, Gongsun Qi. As the representative of the neutral forces of Zhongzhou State, there were too many possibilities for the Jiang family of South America to compromise and cooperate with Gongsun Qi, both now and in the future. Lin Fengting was deep in thought. At the same time, Zhongzhou State. Lin An. His Majesty looked at Shang in front of him and said calmly, as for the last one to pay attention to, it is Gongsun III. Gongsun III? Shang looked blank. Hearing the surname Gongsun, the first thing he thought of was Gongsun Qi. But among the four spirits, Gongsun Qi's strength was definitely the eldest. On the contrary, Shang was absolutely right to be the third. Gongsun III? If it wasn't Gongsun Qi, who was it? I'm used to calling him that. His Majesty laughed at himself and said lightly, it's Gongsun Qi. The hillside was not high. Gongsun Qi, dressed in white and hiding all the opportunities, soon walked to the top of the hillside. Qin Weibai took the initiative to reach out her hand. Gongsun Qi had a strange look on his face, even a little flattered. Everyone in the dark world knew that the goddess never shook hands with anyone. Tonight, what was going on? Hello, Boss Qin. Gongsun Qi held Qin Weibai's palm, but he didn't dare to hold it for too long. Things were a little abnormal, so he was even a little vigilant. Boss Qin, why did you ask me to come here tonight? There is indeed one thing. Qin Weibai said softly. Just say it. Gongsun Qi nodded and looked at Lin Fengting with a calm expression. It's just a small matter. I hope you can talk to Jiang Qiansong on behalf of Zhongzhou State tonight. Qin Weibai said quietly. Oh. Gongsun Qi smiled with some playfulness. Jiang Qiansong? He didn't think about the cause and effect, because Qin Weibai would always explain it. So his question was very straightforward, very straightforward. What's in it for me? Qin Weibai hesitated, bowed slightly, and said softly, Third uncle, please help me. Third uncle. Gongsun Qi slowly turned around and looked at Qin Weibai. His eyes became extremely deep in an instant. Chapter 447. In Eastern Europe, the famous sword sharpness basically meant invincible sharpness. Qin Shilai, the dark sword master of Eastern Europe, rarely left Eastern Europe. Before the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, Eastern Europe was calm. So almost no one had seen Qin Shilai fight. Even when the Qin clan was in trouble, it was often the Polar Ground Alliance that they supported to solve the problem. The reason why Qin Shilai was ranked first on the holy list was mostly because he had challenged the Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong 3 times and escaped unscathed. Only a few people knew that this ranking was inflated. This year's ranking on the divine list was inflated. Li Tianlan, who ranked 9th, directly squeezed Qin Shilai, who should have entered the 15th place on the divine list, to the holy list. But even if Qin Shilai was ranked at the bottom of the divine list, it was still not his strength. Jiang Qiansong was sure of this. The Jiang family of South America had cooperated with Rekvia for a long time. Rekvia's main competitors in Eastern Europe were the other 3 families in Eastern Europe. So the Jiang family of South America had a lot of information about the other 3 families in Eastern Europe. This information was enough to convince Jiang Qiansong that Qin Shilai had long had the strength to enter the divine list. It was also because of this that Jiang Qiansong wanted to retreat. There was already a usurper in the Rekvia family, and the usurper turned to Li Tianlan. The Qin clan was also on Li Tianlan's side. Qin Shilai stood here with Li Tianlan, with hundreds of elites of Xinyuan sword troop. Jiang Qiansong had to go. Although he felt that he still had a chance of winning, in the current situation, the risk had gradually exceeded the possibility of victory. The shrill whistle pierced the night sky, and Jiang Qiansong became more and more anxious. He really couldn't give up Black Ghost. In the face of Qin Shilai's attack, Jiang Qiansong did not fight back at all and was completely focused on defense. His eyes were always fixed on the broken castle. There was a battle outside the castle. There was also a battle inside the castle. The entire castle looked extremely dilapidated, but it still looked like a huge monster entrenched in the mountainous area. But now, this monster's body was shaking violently. The battle inside the castle spread from the inside to the outside. Large areas outside the castle were constantly collapsing, and smoke and dust were constantly filling the air, almost covering the night sky. Jiang Qinsong had no idea how intense the battle inside was. Should he advance or retreat? Jiang Qinsong began to hesitate like never before. He could feel that Black Ghost did not approach him in the whistle, but was getting farther and farther away from him. This showed that the current Black Ghost had completely lost control of the battle with Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was suppressing Black Ghost? Jiang Qinsong felt that it was ridiculous, but he couldn't help but think about the consequences of this situation. Now his choice was actually very simple. Instead of retreating, he would temporarily get rid of Qin Shilai with the fastest speed and join Black Ghost. The combination of his absolute defense and Black Ghost's absolute attack was the greatest chance of winning tonight's battle. If the two of them didn't fight and joined hands to break out of the encirclement, it was almost certain that they would succeed. But he was not sure what state Black Ghost was under Li Tianlan's suppression. If Black Ghost was seriously injured, he would not advance but retreat. Instead, his last escape route might be blocked. He didn't want Black Ghost to die. But his own survival was the most important thing. Black Ghost was dead, Jiang Qinyan was dead, the Jiang family of South America would directly withdraw from the game in Eastern Europe, and the headquarters would be badly hurt. The consequences were dire. But in such a consequence, if he also died, the Jiang family of South America would not only be badly hurt, but also at the end of the road. Jiang Qinsong knew this very well. So when Black Ghost's battle was already a little bad, Jiang Qinsong didn't know whether he should persist or give up. The sharp sword light became more and more dazzling in front of him. The sword energy rose into the sky. The domain around Jiang Qinsong had been extremely deformed by the tearing. Jiang Qinsong, who was holding up the domain to deal with Qin Shilai's attack, took a step back subconsciously. This step was very small, but it was extremely subtle. As soon as his feet landed, Jiang Qinsong had noticed something wrong. It was an indescribable feeling. It seemed that at this moment, even the surrounding air had solidified, and there was an indescribable danger in all directions. Jiang Qinsong suddenly looked up. The sword light disappeared in his sight. Qin Shilai's figure appeared in his eyes without any cover, extremely clear. It was not only Qin Shilai who was clear. All of a sudden, Jiang Qinsong found that the 100 elites of Xianyuan's sword around him had become extremely clear. Their positions seemed to have moved, but they also seemed to have not moved. The minute change was completely concealed by the frozen silence. Perhaps it was just a single step, but it had already quietly formed an incomparably strange formation. At this moment, in front of the castle, every elite of Xianyuan's sword troop was very clear. Qin Shilai stood in the middle, so clear that he was almost dazzling. Dark Sword Master. Super elite troops. The two sides seemed to be completely connected in an instant, forming a sword formation that could repel and tear everything apart. Jiang Qinsong stood in the center of the sword formation, out of place. The sword of the Lin clan. The sword of the Li family. The sword of the Qin clan. They were of the same origin. This was the most fierce and overbearing sword intent in the dark world. Surrounded by this kind of sword intent, Jiang Qinsong could only think of 4 words. Those who oppose me will die. The sharp sword began to rise slowly. In an instant, from all directions, all the forces of hundreds of elites of Xianyuan's sword troop involuntarily gathered toward the sharp sword edge. The pressure as majestic as the sea roared and filled the world, pressed toward Jiang Qinsong, and finally gathered on the sharp sword edge. Qin Shilai's movements were getting slower and slower, as if he was bearing an unbearable weight. The huge force scattered and gathered, locking Jiang Qinsong in place. Jiang Qinsong could only take this sword strike head-on. It was not until now that he really understood Qin Shilai's plan. All the previous attacks were just to force him to adjust his position. Qin Shilai had never thought of fighting with him. All he wanted was this sword strike. One sword strike to decide the outcome. This was the standard style of the Lin clan. It was also the style of the Li family. Qin Shilai's face turned pale in the gathering of power. The sword formation of Xianyuan's sword troop became more and more perfect. Double digits of thunder-shocking realm experts and dozens of experts at the peak of the fire-flaming realm formed a formation, with invincible realm experts as the core. Even Qin Shilai himself could not bear such a huge force. His figure gradually became illusory and transparent, but the surging power all over the sky continued to gather and turned into the sword intent that flowed wildly. The messy sword light gathered and boiled in Qin Shilai's hands, tearing the sky. In front of Jiang Qiansong, everything had completely disappeared, leaving only the sword light that kept flying in his eyes. The sword light rushed up to the sky and fell to the ground, as if it were outlining something. Vaguely, an indifferent figure appeared in front of Jiang Qiansong, as if it did not exist. The shadow was very vague, and it was even difficult to form a complete outline. But the sword intent all over the sky was completely rioting with the appearance of this shadow. The sword intent flew, as if it was tearing heaven and earth apart. It was an illusory shadow without any charm or even a silhouette. The shadow seemed to be holding a sword in its hand. Amidst the endless light, the sword was simply lifted up. Then it stabbed straight. It was a simple and slow movement. But at the moment when the sword's shadow moved forward, all the sword light instantly gathered in the sword and the shadow. The long sword lit up instantly. The shadow also became clear for a moment. It was a slender, firm, and incomparably sharp figure. Jiang Qiansong seemed to see a golden mask. All of a sudden, Jiang Qiansong felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. The clear shadow for less than half a second disappeared completely. Qin Shilai's figure appeared in front of Jiang Qiansong. Jiang Qiansong finally recognized this sword move, or the starting gesture of this sword move. The 15th blade, Samsara. This sword move started with the 15th blade. Samsara was the sword intent other than the 24 moves of sword. Under this sword move, all things turned to ashes. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.